Second reading of the Sporting Events Bill. Baroness Twycross.
I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time. My Lords, major sporting events matter. They matter to the fans who fill our stadiums and line our streets. They matter to the athletes who train for years for the chance to compete for our country on the world's biggest stage. They matter to our communities, our local economies and our national story. And they matter because at their best, they bring people together in a way that few other things can. These events play a unique role in fostering a shared sense of belonging. They generate moments of collective experience that contribute directly to social cohesion and national pride, uniting diverse communities and showcasing the best of our nation on a global stage. Hosting these events here opens the country as a whole. They serve as a powerful platform to showcase the best of the UK, from sporting prowess to arts and culture, and even the diverse food that defines British cuisine. These world-class occasions become a unique shared celebration of belonging, demonstrating that the UK's excellence is not confined to sport, but encompasses its deep and varied cultural life. I was privileged enough to be successful in the public ballot to get tickets for a couple of events at the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. The excitement of my goddaughters, my niece and nephew in seeing elite sport for the first time, and their pride in our country was infectious. It remains one of their strongest memories of their childhoods. The whole country embraced the Olympics. The Games lifted the mood of communities up and down the country and provided an economic boost. It remains one of the lasting legacies of my noble friend, the late Baroness Jow, and the type of event we would like to see more of in the UK. My Lords, the UK's record of hosting world-class major sporting events is one we should all be proud of. Last summer alone, we smashed records, delivering the biggest ever Women's Rugby World Cup, with unprecedented crowd numbers watching on as the Red Roses lifted the trophy as champions. And as we set out in our manifesto, this government is committed to continuing to deliver international events like these with pride, seeking new opportunities where we can to create a legacy to inspire the next generation of talent while promoting exercise and healthy living. We have already secured a fantastic pipeline of events over the coming years. This summer alone will see the Glasgow Commonwealth Games, European Athletics Championships and Women's T20 Cricket World Cup. Next year brings the Grand Départ for the Tour de France and the Tour de France Femmes, and then together with Ireland we host the UEFA European Championships in 2028. And last month we announced that we've commissioned our expert arm's-length body, UK Sport, to carry out an initial assessment to consider the feasibility of hosting a future Olympic and Paralympic Games in the North in the 2040s. Major sporting events are an economic success story, my Lords. They drive economic growth and job creation, acting as a catalyst for inward investment, improving transport connections, and playing a key role in the regeneration of world-class facilities for local communities up and down the country to enjoy. For example, this government is investing up to £557 million in hosting Euros 2028. This investment alone is predicted to deliver £3.2 billion of socio-economic benefits across the UK. That is a nearly six-fold direct return on investment. Such landmark occasions also leave a lasting legacy, creating unparalleled pathways for people to engage in physical activity and find their own place in the sporting life of the UK. Impact 25, the Women's Rugby World Cup Legacy Programme, has reached 850 clubs up and down the country since its inception in 2024, and 37,000 women and girls in the last year alone. It has also trained more than 3,000 new female coaches and match officials. The purpose of this bill is therefore simple but important: to better equip the UK to attract and deliver the biggest international sporting events and ensure we can continue to deliver these benefits in years to come. The UK already has a global reputation for excellence in hosting major sporting events. This bill will bolster that reputation and send a clear message that the UK is event ready. Global competition to host major sporting events is fierce and increasing. The UK is a strong player in this field, but this bill gives further confidence that we're ready to uphold our commitments and stay competitive. It will set in statute a framework that enables certain sporting events to benefit from the enhanced commercial protections needed to preserve the integrity of events and, importantly, offset costs to taxpayers. This bill is built on our foundational principle of a UK-wide approach, co-designed with devolved partners to serve the entire Union. Most immediately, these provisions underpin the successful delivery of Euro 2028, and should the UK's bid be successful, and I'm sure all noble lords wish it will be, the FIFA Women's World Cup in 2035. My lords, at its core, the bill sets out a framework that allows a standard set of measures to be applied to sporting events that meet certain conditions. Ministers here or in each of the devolved governments will consider which of the measures set out in the bill are appropriate for any given qualifying event and apply them through regulations. These regulations will set out event-specific details, such as where and when the measures apply. For an event to be in scope, it must meet 3 conditions. Firstly, it must take place, at least in part, in the UK. Secondly, it must not regularly be held here. Thirdly, it must either be an event of significant international interest with the potential to deliver social economic benefits, or an event of strategic importance in facilitating other such events being held in the UK in the future. In practice, this means those one-off bids for major sporting events which move from host to host, such as the Euros, World Cups or Olympic and Paralympic Games. Events where enhanced commercial protections are needed to meet the conditions of hosting, and where every effort should unashamedly be made to enhance the UK's competitive advantage. The bill provides a framework of time-limited provisions that can be applied by the UK and devolved governments to events meeting these criteria. First, it will put fans first by criminalising the unauthorised resale of tickets for qualifying sporting events. This will help ensure event organisers have greater control over the onward sale of tickets, and that more tickets go directly to genuine supporters rather than to touts seeking to profit from events in the UK which are subsidised by the public purse. Your Lordships will also be aware of the Government's commitment and separate plans to introduce a price cap on the resale of tickets for live events more generally to prevent fans being ripped off by touts. Those measures will preserve a thriving resale market while cracking down on exploitative touts, so fans don't feel forced into paying vastly inflated prices. We are, and I emphasise this, fully committed to these wider and separate measures, and we will publish a draft bill for pre-legislative scrutiny in this parliamentary session. To ensure the wider secondary ticketing provisions operate effectively, we want to listen to the live event sector and fans before formally introducing them to Parliament. Doing so will, in our view, ensure the legislation is enforceable and future-proof. The tightly drawn ticketing provisions in this bill are designed to deliver on the specific requirements of major sporting event owners when we are bidding for events which do not normally take place in the UK. These requirements are made clear during bidding processes and involve limiting the sale and resale of tickets to authorised bodies and platforms only. My Lords, the bill also covers powers on advertising and trading. This second aspect of the bill will enable the prohibition of unauthorised advertising and trading around event locations by bringing forward time-limited criminal offences. In practice, this means that the government will be able to put in place restricted advertising and trading zones around places such as competition venues, official fan zones and transport hubs, and any areas surrounding them, provided these places are being used for or in connection with the sporting event in question. These provisions are designed to protect commercial investment while minimising the impact on existing businesses. They will also help support the safe movement of spectators. Thirdly, the bill will prohibit unauthorised association with a qualifying sporting event through a general prohibition enforceable through the civil courts. Sponsorship is a critical revenue stream for event organisers and owners. If sponsors believe their rights can or will be undermined by rival businesses creating an unauthorised association with the event, the commercial value of sponsoring UK-hosted events diminishes. This provision helps to create an attractive offer for sponsors by protecting their investment and commercial rights, helping to shield the taxpayer from increased hosting costs. Fourthly, the bill includes provision to manage transport and traffic in relation to a sporting event in England. Effective transport and traffic management are essential to the safe and smooth operation of any major event, and the bill ensures that those arrangements can be properly supported. My Lord, separate from these framework powers, the bill also creates a bespoke funding power to enable the efficient and successful delivery of sporting events across England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. This means for the Secretary of State a single dedicated power for the future funding of sporting events in England. It also provides Scottish ministers and Northern Ireland departments with the power to support sporting events in Scotland or in Northern Ireland, respectively. Financial assistance provided through this provision will be subject to ministerial discretion alongside the usual processes to ensure it aligns with the general principles for managing public money. My Lord, sufficient funding powers already exist in Wales, so this provision will not apply there. Taken together, these provisions will help ensure that the United Kingdom remains an attractive host for major sporting events and continues to build on its world-leading reputation in this field. If we get this right, the benefits will be felt far beyond the field of play. They'll be felt not just in host towns and cities, but across the country, in the businesses and communities that benefit from them, in the young people inspired by them, and, my lords, our communities across the UK unified by them. I hope that your Lordship's House will welcome this bill and look forward to the debate. I beg to move.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time.
Lords, I thank the noble Baroness the Minister for her introduction to the Sporting Events Bill. My noble friend Lord Addington will be leading on this from our benches and may occasionally hand me the baton. We welcome the bill, which creates a legislative framework that will attract international sporting events, as the noble Minister has already said, to the UK. It will provide the opportunity to inspire future generations of athletes, create unforgettable experiences, boost visitors' numbers and the economy, and exercise our soft power through sports. And can we on these benches welcome and congratulate Lord McConnell to his role as Ministerial Advisor on soft power and major events. We look forward to working with him. The legislative framework itself is a useful one and will assist with the organising of those events that we have already secured. The noble Baroness has mentioned Euro 2028. It will also help when bidding to host future events. But should there be a framework for putting such bids together as well, a clear bidding framework, or at least a commitment to increase transparency surrounding bids? That would be a strong sign of more positive intentions from the government for the sports industry. And this bill can be useful not just for sporting events. I can also see it being utilised for cultural ones. The Edinburgh Festival could benefit, and all-year events such as the City of Culture. It's my understanding that the government intends to set out a strategy for major events which include culture. Can the noble Baroness the Minister tell us what the timeline for this is? As she mentioned, London hosted the wonderful 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And here can I join her and pay tribute to the great Tessa Jowell. Alongside the Games, of course, was the Cultural Olympiad. Danny Boyle's opening ceremony, a beautiful, brilliant, spectacular, that was a showcase for our great creative industries, and ended memorably with our monarch meeting James Bond and then jumping out of a helicopter. But it wasn't just about the Olympic arena. Across the nation, people got together to engage in cultural activities. In all, 621 productions and projects resulted in 13,000 performances and events at 1,270 venues across the UK. However, the legislation passed for those games did not include its cultural element. For the sporting events that fall under this legislation, would the noble Baroness the Minister consider including affiliated cultural events? There appears to be scope, and I think she was suggesting this in her opening remarks, but we would like to make this clearer in legislation. Then there are the Group A of listed sporting events, the crown jewels, protected for free-to-air TV. This bill has been created with sporting events of significant interest in mind, events that we believe should also be free-to-air. Group A should be expanded. There was joy, and of course sorrow, for those able to see the UEFA final last weekend. Shouldn't it have been something that everyone could access to watch for free? And what about the Glasgow Commonwealth Games happening this July? We on these benches believe there should be no need anymore for special pleading from the Prime Minister. Just add this to the bill. Then there is infrastructure, transport and security. Some of these considerations have made it into this bill, which is a positive step and welcomed again by these benches. But what does seem to be missing is built environment intervention, athletes' accommodation, as well as facilities for visitors, restaurants and parks, and access to accommodation at an appropriate price range. These would drive opportunities to boost the tourist economy and are needs that we think should be considered within the framework and the bill. We are glad to see consideration of advertising and branding. This is important for interconnected reasons. A good legal framework protects sports organisations from unauthorised branding and marketing, but also, as the Noble Baroness, the Minister said, makes deals for official sponsors more appealing. It also limits the unauthorised use of marketing for activities, usually online, that could cause harm. My noble friend, Lord Foster, will elaborate more on this topic, and you will not be surprised to hear on gambling. There is also the matter of the use of trademarks, more on this from the noble Lord Addington. Finally, and I think this happened again today, there has been some concern expressed in this House about having to wait for a draft ticketing bill. My Lords, does this bill not provide an opportunity to discuss how we can create a strong anti-touting ticket system across the board with proper enforcement? Doesn't the Noble Baroness, the Minister, agree that we should seize this opportunity now rather than have to wait another year for a different bill? I end by saying we look forward to working with the government on this bill.
My Lords, could I start by apologising to your Lordship's chamber? I made it into the wrong end of the chamber at the start of the debate and then sprinted around the outside somewhat slower than I used to be able to do. But I declare an interest. I'm Chair of Sport Wales. I'm a board member of UK Sport. I'm a trustee of the Foundation of Light, and I sit on His Majesty's Government's Soft Power Council, particularly looking at sport. I've been part of the bid team for the Manchester Olympic and Paralympic Games when we bid against Sydney, where we had 100 years of rain data to show there's more rain in Sydney at that time of year than Manchester, and they held up a picture of Bondi Beach. But we learnt from each of those experiences, and I worked like I'm going to say my noble friend in sport, the Noble Lord Holmes, worked on much of the 2012 Games together. It's easy to forget that when we bid for those games, we were only bidding for the Olympics, and the Paralympics was a separate negotiation. And thanks to the amazing work of Tessa Jowl, she made that happen. On stage presenting to the OC, she wanted to stand up and say that we were bidding for the 60 days of the Games. And unfortunately, at that time, we couldn't risk anything getting in the way of the IOC awarding the Games to us. But those Games raised the bar on both the Olympics and Paralympics, and also disability sport. There's a lot to be said for avoiding bespoke legislation every time we want to bid for a Games. And I support much of this bill, but I do think we could be just a little more bold. And I think it's a potentially really exciting time looking at a possible bid for a Games in the north. But being Welsh, but with the geographical designation of Eaglescliffe in the county of Durham, there's a lot of local interest. And I understand it's probably too early for the Minister to say, but I'd welcome a little bit more understanding of what the definition of the North is. I'd probably prefer us to say the North of England. There's a lot of the UK above where I live. But I think people remember those really magical times and understand actually what major sporting events can do for us. I understand we're looking for the Welsh legislative consent, and the long title mentions Scotland, England and Northern Ireland, and I'm wondering if I'm missing something, but would like to understand why Wales is not there and what conversations and discussion has taken place with the new government in Wales. Next year, we have the Tour de France Grand Depart going through Scotland, England and Wales. This is a really exciting time for, re-emphasising the power that the UK has in international sport, but I wonder what impact the bill might have where sport has devolved, where there's a crossover with major events, whether we'd still be able to use this bill to bid for events like that in the future, because these are really important things, because UK sport and the UK has a great deal of expertise in bidding for events. And I think it's really important to note that our international reputation is also based on holding and hosting much smaller events that show our commitment to sport, to show it's something we're actually really good at. Recently, the UK hosted the World Team Table Tennis event, which was incredible. But it also shows the international federations who have an impact on our bidding for major events that we are committed to a variety of different sports. And the Commonwealth Games is a really important part of that. We're hugely thankful to Glasgow for stepping in. It's really important to Wales and to Welsh athletes as a stepping stone to potentially to GB. But actually it connects local people to the athletes, and for all the countries of the Commonwealth, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, but also the smaller countries, it really means an awful lot, and we should be proud of that. I'm very interested in what the major sport and event strategy will look like, and one of the things UK Sport recognises very well and works very well at promoting is making sure that when bidding for smaller events, it does sit across the 4 home countries. And in terms of what's been done in Wales, we had the AIG Golf in Porthcawl, World Para Fencing in Cardiff. All those make an impact, and they don't need primary legislation, but they tie to our global aspiration. One of the things that arose out of the recent Soft Power Council meeting was that more clarity was required on what is a major or mega sporting event. And I was wondering whether His Majesty's Government intend to offer a definition of this, because I think it would be hugely beneficial for the sector. The sports sector in its entirety is huge and significant, and this would help in terms of future planning. A number of organisations that work with current UK events asking for this clarity. And you could argue that if they're currently operating and they're successful, then additional help is not needed. But I think it's really important to understand the jigsaw that needs to exist in terms of what we're trying to aspire to on a world stage. And I don't think you can ever underestimate the impact that we have as the UK in terms of not the history of just starting the Paralympic Games and 2012, but the ongoing role that the UK has in promoting disability events. One such example is wheelchair tennis, and the LTA is one of the best governing bodies at promoting inclusion and is doing a really good job. The world is changing, not least due to climate change. By the time we get to Brisbane 2030, there might be a very different games, not just the type of events that are included. There's a move to much more street and urban games, but the impact on climate change. And I'd like to understand more about what consideration has been given to environmental sustainability, thinking about transport. We know that that's going to be an issue in Los Angeles, and looking at how we can further push the decarbonisation. A lot of sports are already looking at this. You could argue the easiest way to help the environment is to not have athletes travel anywhere. But the games as they exist are going to be very different, and we need to be fleet of foot in terms of what we do in the UK to understand what bidding for future games might look like. The legacy of 2012 was amazing. I'm always slightly uncomfortable when people say the 2012 Paralympics changed the world for the disabled people. It was the best 8 weeks of my life. But I think we also have to be careful about overselling what sport can do, unless we invest in legacy. And Join In was an incredible legacy of the 2012 Games, the volunteering charity. We need to think about how we build in social and community aspects at bid stage. It's cheaper, it's easier, you've got more chance of it working. There's always a spike in participation after the Games. But if we think about legacy at the very start, we have a real chance of making a difference. Other issues that have been raised is the cost of bidding. I remember in 2005 talking to one of the planners for 2012 and them saying the difficulty of predicting the cost of steel 7 years into the future. But also I think this is something that other countries are going to be looking at as well, because you can spend sometimes millions in terms of bidding for a Games, and I think we have to just be very smart in terms of thinking what we do. And I know this is outside the remit of this bill, but this year the UK is hosting the summit for the International Working Group on Women and Sport. This started in 1994 as the Brighton Declaration. It's now the Brighton and Helsinki Declaration. It's got support from 600 organisations around the world. The summit's going to be in July, and it will be an amazing opportunity to network, and I do hope there'll be a ministerial presence there. This is a situation where the eyes of the world are on us. We have a chance to influence sport and international federations, but it's actually not a sporting event as we might think about it. I think within committee we also need to look at the cost of policing and security. Sadly, it's a necessity. But what we're seeing in some smaller events in the UK is the cost of policing and security is making it unsustainable to hold some of the smaller events, which are part of the jigsaw for what we want to do in the future. Again, not quite in this bill, but we've been talking in Grand Committee about the Care Quality Commission and their changing guidance. And I think this is something where it would be great if we could join up these different threads of conversation and discussion to make sure that we're in the best possible shape to go forwards. And I'd like to thank Sport and Recreation Alliance for their continued discussion in this space. My Lords, I support this bill. We have an amazing opportunity. We could be a little bit more brave. And if I can steal a quote from the 2012 Games, we have a chance to inspire a generation.
Lords, I rise in strong support of this bill and my noble friend's excellent introduction to it. It's rather humbling and daunting to follow the legendary Baroness Tanya Gray-Thompson. She's an inspiration to all of us, both in what she did as an athlete and what she's done since, and I congratulate her on her speech. Major sporting events, major global sporting events are utterly transformative, economically, socially, reputationally and inspirationally. Listen to Emil Zatopek, star of London 1948, winner of golds in the 5,000 and 10,000 metres. This is what he said: "It was a liberation of the spirit to be there in London after the dark days of the war. The revival of the Olympics was as if the sun had come out." Sport can do this. 4 years later, he won 3 more gold medals in Helsinki. As a 10-year-old boy, I saw England beat Mexico on the way to winning the World Cup in 1966. The inspiration has never left me. As a pro bono member of the FA's Performance Advisory Group since 2016, I declare an interest. I'm hoping, as I do every 4 years, needless to say, we might win the World Cup again this year. I wish Scotland well as well.
Thank you.
The inspirational Lord Sebastian Coe and the blessed Baroness Tessa Jowell that several others have referred to, how we miss her, but they brought us London 2012. Everybody's talked about what a wonderful event that was, the Olympics and the Paralympics, Britain at its best. Even the London cab drivers stopped moaning. Since then, in football alone, we've had the Women's Euros, which transformed football for women and girls, legacy, as the Baroness mentioned just now, and the Men's Euro final. We know the UK and Ireland will co-host the Men's Euros in 2028, and hopefully in 2035 we will host the Women's World Cup. And last year, the brilliant Women's Rugby World Cup was here. Each such event has creates a massive opportunity for our country to promote our sport, our hospitality, our values, our health and well-being. As the chair of Somerset County Cricket Club until recently, I should mention too that starting imminently, this country is hosting the Women's T20 Cricket World Cup. In participation, it will be by far the biggest event of its kind, with over 250,000 attendances and tickets already sold in 52 countries. More importantly, over 500,000 girls and women from diverse backgrounds will participate in related events. 236,000 school children already have. This is a huge step towards the ECB's ambition for cricket to become the most diverse and inclusive sport in the country. This, by the way, is just one aspect of the transformation of cricket, which may be the fastest growing sport in the world, driven in part by becoming an Olympic sport in LA 2028. Extraordinary things are happening. Last week, Nepal beat China at cricket. Recently, I was talking to a good county cricket bowler who was good county cricket bowler who is retiring. I said, "What next?" He said, "I've just been interviewed for the role of fast bowling coach to the German women's cricket team."
Wow.
Imagine the headlines if we ever lose to Germany at cricket. We, the UK, need to be ready and able to continue hosting these events in an increasingly sport-mad world where the competition to host them is becoming ever more fierce. No other country can mention our history of global sporting leadership. The Paralympics have been mentioned, but winning bids in the future will require much more: world-class, accessible, environmentally sustainable venues, brilliant organisation and logistics, top facilities for athletes, fantastic media and sponsorship, outstanding travel and hospitality, socially inclusive promotion, ticketing and pricing, unlike the forthcoming World Cup, and discreet, effective security for athletes, fans and spectators. If we get even one of these wrong, it would threaten not just that event, but our ability to attract future events, which is one of the reasons this bill is so important. If we're to assure the owners of these events that we can host them better than anywhere else in the world, then it's essential for the UK and its government to stand foursquare behind every single bid to assure it and actively support it in the various ways I've just mentioned. On the 3rd of September 2018, the Cycling Tour of Britain came to my local town, Barnstaple, where I was able to introduce the young cyclists from our North Devon Wheelers Club to Geraint Thomas, the brilliant Welsh cyclist and that year's winner of the Tour de France. He's a wonderful man. Inspired by that moment and by their own talent and hard work, those young cyclists have gone on to cycling success in the years that followed, and the Tour de France is coming. The most profound impact of major sporting events is these moments, the memories made, the ambition spurred, the potential unlocked, the legacy. This is why I hope we will see overwhelming support for this bill. And to finish where I started, Emil Zatopek's most succinct and memorable advice back then to his fellow athletes also applies to governments when the going gets tough. If you can't go on anymore, go faster. I commend this bill to the House.
My Lords, while it's a pro bono position, I declare my interest as a board member of the London Marathon Foundation. Sport, as the government rightly recognises, has a unique power. It brings people together in a way that little else can. It inspires, unites and instills pride in our communities. And when we host major sporting events, we don't just celebrate sport, we generate real economic benefits, create jobs and, as we've heard, inspire the next generation. My Lords, this bill is a step in the right direction in creating a common legislative framework that can be applied to support the successful delivery of future major sporting events. However, many in the sector regard it as a missed opportunity. The bill is, by design, narrowly drawn. It applies only to events that are of a kind that is not regularly held in the United Kingdom and is likely to be of significant international interest. In practice, as we've heard, that means it's really tailored to one-off international tournaments like the Euros, World Cup or World Athletics Championships. And although the criteria are open to some interpretation, and there are certainly questions to be asked about which other events may be included in the future, which I'm sure we'll discuss in committee, what is clear, and was reiterated by the Noble Baroness the Minister in her opening, is that the current definition excludes the very events that define Britain's global sporting identity, Wimbledon, the Open, the London Marathon, the British Grand Prix, to name but a few. My Lords, as we well know, these are not occasional events. They happen year after year, and year after year they deliver precisely the benefits ministers rightly want to champion: economic growth, international prestige and community pride. So the main question for me that arises in relation to the legislation we're discussing today is a quite simple one. Why should one-off international events be given protections deemed necessary for their successful delivery, while those same protections are not going to be offered to iconic homegrown events that have been a regular part of the UK's cultural calendar for generations? Ministers have said the legislation will help make it easier for the UK to host major sporting events, creating jobs and investments, and that is extremely welcome. Yet the definition of the eligible events as currently drafted in the bill is very restrictive and denies ministers the flexibility to support the full breadth of the UK's world-class sporting calendar. And the skeleton nature of the bill, setting out the framework but naturally leaving much of the detail to secondary legislation, means that regular UK events aren't covered by the provisions could become increasingly at a competitive advantage, particularly in relation to securing sponsorship over time, for instance. And these aren't just abstract concerns, there will be practical consequences as a result. As Alex Kelman and Freya Davey of Lewis Silkin highlighted in a recent article, the bill as it stands does leave a clear gap by its exclusion of regularly held UK events. They point out that these events collectively bring enormous economic value to the UK and are routinely impacted by a number of the challenges that this bill seeks to address. Take ambush marketing, for instance. At present, major events organisers are forced to rely on private legal remedies to tackle it, remedies that are costly, complex and often insufficient. This bill, in Schedule 4, introduces a stronger statutory protection against unauthorised commercial association, and that's very welcome. But why should those provisions and protections be reserved only for one-off events? Why should an international tournament benefit from clear statutory rights, while a world-renowned regularly held UK event might continue or has to continue to rely on imperfect private law remedies? The bill itself already contains a flexible framework, allowing ministers to decide how protections apply to different events currently within its scope. Extending that flexibility to established regular UK events, I don't believe would be radical. It would rather be, in my view, a logical extension of the bill's provisions. And at a time when the sector is already under strain due to a variety of challenges, including rising police costs, the implications of Martin's Law, increased employment costs, regulatory pressures and high business rates, the absence of the protections from the proposed sporting framework set out in the bill to UK major-based events organisers who are excluded does feel particularly acute. We're told that a major event strategy is forthcoming, again very welcome, but without the legislative ambition to match, there is a risk that it will fall short of what the sector needs and indeed is asking for. My Lords, if this bill acknowledges that protections such as those against ambush marketing are currently insufficient, then surely the answer is not to apply them selectively, but to strengthen them more widely, not just for the events that we hope to host, but for the events that already define us. And the government, I believe, with this bill in front of us, should be, and I hope will, grasp the opportunity to expand this bill and ensure that those regularly held events can be as successful as possible. So I would encourage the Minister, and I'm sure we will discuss this in committee, to go further and extend the provisions in the bill to include such regular, annual, nationally significant UK-based sporting events. A number of noble lords have already raised this, but could I also ask the Minister when the government will publish its major event strategy and how she sees this legislation fitting within a genuinely comprehensive approach that includes rather than excludes the UK's iconic homegrown events. Finally, there are currently powers in the Finance Act 2014 to exempt overseas competitors or officials accredited by the organisers from income tax for the period of major events, such as the upcoming Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, where regulations have recently been passed to do that. Given the desire to bring together a suite of powers to cover the respective events in this legislation, is the Minister confident those provisions are sufficient to ensure a joined-up and responsive approach to major events being hosted in the UK?
My Lords, I thank my noble friend the Minister for her clear, concise introduction to this debate, and I refer the House to my golf interests in the Register. It's a pleasure to speak at second reading to welcome this bill. I support its central purpose to provide the UK with a clear, consistent and credible legislative framework for hosting major international sporting events. The bill fulfills a clear manifesto commitment to strengthen Britain's position as a world-leading host of global sporting events and to remove unnecessary uncertainty and delay. It replaces a piecemeal approach with a toolkit that doesn't need rebuilding every few years. That clarity matters, and this bill sends the right signal at home and abroad. As my noble friend has said, major sporting events are not simply moments of entertainment or national celebration. They are economic catalysts, generators of tourism, drivers of inward investment, and powerful platforms for projecting the UK's values and reputations on the global stage. Sport brings people together like nothing else can, fostering pride, identity and community. Anyone watching the Arsenal parade in North London at the weekend could see that vividly in action, albeit through a thick pink haze. Sporting events can also play a crucial role in national cohesion and local regeneration. Host cities and regions experience not only immediate economic uplift, but also longer-term legacy effects. In that sense, major events are more than spectacle, they leave a lasting mark. Looking ahead, the UEFA Men's European Championships in 2028, hosted by the UK and Ireland, and a potential FIFA Women's World Cup in 2035 will again demonstrate what this country has to offer and will be an opportunity to build bonds with other nations by sharing a common human experience. In doing so, they contribute directly to the UK's soft power. The ability to convene the world, to host global audiences, athletes and institutions reinforces our position, not merely as a participant in international sport, but as a trusted and capable partner. This is not just culturally valuable, it is strategically important. At a time when nations are consciously using sport to project influence and attract investment, the government has recognised that the UK cannot afford to stand still. As UK sport has made clear, certainty and clarity in the legal and regulatory environment are now baseline requirements for international rights holders. The days of relying on ad hoc assurances are long gone. Organisers want to know that a country can move quickly, legislate coherently and deliver reliably. This bill responds directly to that reality. That is why it has been welcomed by the sector. The British Olympic Association has also endorsed the shift away from bespoke event-by-event legislation, noting that a standing framework strengthens the UK's competitiveness. And I also welcome the Government's Commission of UK Sport to assess the potential for hosting an Olympic or Paralympic Games in the north of England in 2040. I too also welcome the appointment of my noble friend Lord McConnell as a ministerial advisor on soft power and major events. He will, I know, bring his long experience and endless enthusiasm to the task. Both are important steps in thinking strategically about the UK's role as a host nation. That work sits alongside a broader opportunity for the United Kingdom to think more strategically about its events pipeline, how we identify, secure and deliver a balanced portfolio of major events that reflect not only economic opportunity, but national priorities, including regional growth, inclusion and sustainability. The government is absolutely right to build a pipeline of future events that bring growth and inward investment, but existing excellence should not be overlooked either. Our established events are the foundation on which much of our reputation as a host nation rests. They demonstrate year after year that the UK can deliver complex, high-profile international events to the highest standard. It's therefore worth the government maybe reflecting whether the framework can evolve, either in this bill or alongside it, to recognise that contribution more explicitly. I speak with a particular interest as a member of the APPG on golf. Scotland is recognised internationally as the home of golf, and in the UK, the Open Championship and the DP World Tour are not peripheral events, but among the most economically significant and globally watched sporting occasions. For example, the 2024 Open Championship generated over 300 million in economic benefit, and a UK-hosted Ryder Cup would be comparable to a Rugby World Cup in visitor spend and international profile, while a Solheim Cup, one of the premier competitions in women's sport, has yet to be hosted in England. That could be a lioness moment to inspire a new generation of young girls and the entire golf ecosystem. And I would hope the forthcoming major event strategy will take note of these opportunities, because research supported by the RNA illustrates the wider contribution of golf to the UK economy and society. In 2019, the sport generated over $5 billion in consumer spending, supported more than 60,000 jobs and contributed around $2.6 billion in economic value. Beyond that, golf delivers over $1 billion in social value each year through improvements to physical health, mental well-being and community engagement. That research also highlights health outcomes. Regular participation in golf contributes to the prevention and management of numerous chronic conditions and suggests that golfers live, on average, longer than non-golfers, so get your clubs out. This is a reminder that sport delivers public health benefits as well as economic returns. I know that the government will want to reassure the sector that established events will not be inadvertently disadvantaged relative to those brought within the bill's framework, and that the forthcoming cross-sector major events strategy should explicitly address the needs of the regularly staged, nationally significant events. Turning to enforcement, I welcome the provisions designed to put fans first, particularly those addressing ticket touting. Given the scale and sophistication of secondary ticketing markets, I do wonder, though, whether the £20,000 cap represents a sufficient deterrent for large-scale operators and whether this is going to be kept under review as markets evolve. Similarly, the provisions on ambush marketing are essential, given how prevalent this issue is across all sports events. That issue is not confined to one-off events, and it also affects commercially significant recurring events. There may therefore be merit in considering whether association rights could, in future, be extended, maybe on a targeted basis, perhaps by regulation, to events of genuine national significance, so that the gap between one-off and recurring events could be narrowed. Finally, I too would want to briefly emphasise the importance of legacy. The true test of this bill will not only be at the events it enables, but the impact those events leave behind in participation, in infrastructure, in economic opportunity and in community well-being. A strong framework is a start, but delivery will decide the outcome. My Lords, this is a welcome, timely and necessary bill. It honours a manifesto commitment, reflects the government's ambition for the UK to remain a world-leading host of major sporting events and responds directly to the expectations of international organisers. I welcome the bill and will support it as it progresses through the House.
Hear, hear.
My Lords, just to take part in this second reading debate. In doing so, I declare my technology interests as set out in the Register variously as advised to the Crown Estate, Endava plc and Simmons & Simmons LLP. Can I congratulate the Minister on the way she introduced the bill as well? I think in its title we have already part of recent sporting heritage if we now always refer the Sporting Events Bill as its acronym SEB. I think that gives the right salute and respect to our colleague Lord Coe, who did so much in leading London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. I'd like to focus on inclusion and innovation, which sadly the bill is largely silent upon, and yet these are the golden threads that I believe enable sporting events to be on the scale and the success that we saw at London 2012. There's far too much in this bill which is left for secondary legislation, most of it on the negative procedure. But to take a step back for a moment, as other noble lords have said, sport goes much further than the field of play when we get it right. Think about the mottos for the 1992 Barcelona Olympic Games, Amigo para siempre, the Paralympic Games, sport beyond limits, and as my noble friend Baroness Gray-Thompson has already referred, London 2012, inspire a generation. That's what sport can do at every level, not least at the major and mega events stage. And that's what we were looking to do when we started the planning journey for London 2012. We appreciated that the way to make good games, great games, was twofold. Firstly, to have the athletes at the heart of every decision we made. Secondly, to have access, diversity and inclusion hardwired into every decision right from the outset. And to that end, would the Minister not agree that it would be helpful to have some of those principles set out on the face of the bill at this stage? It's about principles which I don't believe in any sense would fetter the flexibility that's required when we come to that secondary legislation which goes into more of the operational detail. Turning to ticketing, There's much in the bill around this, but what of inclusive ticketing? At London 2012, we were clear, no free tickets, but we enabled hundreds of thousands of school children to experience world-class sport, often for the first time, by having the highest priced tickets include a portion to fund those tickets that went to school children right across the United Kingdom. What about affordability, having socio and economic inclusion? And what about accessibility within the ticket offerer? Touting is critically important to address, but anti-touting measures of themselves say nothing to affordability and accessibility. Similarly, when we planned the ticketing offering, we made sure that if you're a wheelchair user, you could sit with your friends and family. Never been possible at a sporting event before that. If you had a hearing impairment, you had a seat with direct line of sight to the video board. Mobility impairment, a seat at the end of the row. So an inclusive ticket offering right through the games experience. Would the Minister not agree there are principles here that we could see on the face of the bill? And to that first touch point, often with a major sporting event, trying to get a ticket in the first place, with so much now only being available through digital form, what does the Minister think in terms of the need for non-digital analogue and other means for people to access tickets to these major sporting events? Would the Minister not agree that it would be helpful to incorporate all of this by having an inclusive, by design, statutory objective right at the top of this bill? Turning to innovation, AI and other technologies have the potential to play such a positive role when it comes to the organisation and delivery of these events. Think about predictive crowd modelling, the operation of transportation, city operations, the last mile, almost every element of planning these events. And yet there's no overarching AI framework or strategy set out within the bill. Without addressing this point, it's likely that the approaches to AI will be partial, will have gaps, will say nothing in terms of bias, transparency, privacy and understandability for those spectators, games organisers and people who will be participating in those events, potentially subject to AI without even knowing that AI is in the mix. What about digital ID? It could play such an important role and a positive role when it comes to accessing safely and securely these sporting events. The bill envisages the creation of a whole heap of new data, often of a personal nature. What about provisions around the storage and the sharing of that data? What about interoperability provisions set throughout many of the provisions of the bill? Would it not make sense to have a technology future-proofing clause within the bill which could catch all of this? Because at the moment, the bill understandably is technology neutral, but it is not technology future-proofed. Just one example bringing inclusion and innovation together. Imagine what could be achieved for a truly inclusive, personalised accessibility service. Yes, for disabled people, yes, for older people, yes, for younger people, but for all people wanting to access these sporting events, all of whom, all of us will have particular needs that could be addressed through that alchemy of inclusion and innovation. To conclude, sport has such a power to inspire change, to change us as individuals, as communities, as cities, and as a country. We saw it at London 2012. We see it in sport, unlike almost any other cultural experience in our human experience. What does this look like? Well, perhaps just one example to illustrate. Stephen Hawking, the late, the great Stephen Hawking, speaking at the opening ceremony of the London 2012 Paralympics. Not just talking about possibilities beyond ourselves, talking about possibilities beyond our universe. What a way to blast into 11 days of gravity-defying, attitude-altering, opportunity-creating world-class sport. World-class sport that changes us, world-class sport that goes way beyond the stadia. London 2012 changed us. Major events change us as a United Kingdom. Remember how we all felt in that summer of 2012. Don't we need just some of that change right now, today? Let major sporting events of the future across these shores continue to inspire future generations, and let this sporting events bill play such a positive part in that change.
My Lords, I've travelled the world from age 11 competing or working at all major sporting events, and I was very proud to be part of the 2012 bid team. I'm also very proud to say that my dad coached Lord Holmes as well. I've seen the benefits and the challenges that bringing in major games brings to a city and the countries that host them. For example, the difference in my first Olympic Games in Montreal, which financially shackled the locals for decades, to the amazing success of 2012, which ended up being the exact opposite, uniting our country as I've never witnessed before. I'm sure those that attended the 1966 World Cup will also have that feeling. Sport can do miraculous things. It can be uplifting, inspiring, hugely beneficial to regeneration and business, leaving a legacy, raising community and national emotion and cohesiveness. But we must get it right. Over the last century that I've been around major sporting events, I've seen the sport increasingly becoming relegated as less important sometimes than the opening and closing ceremonies or the events that take place around it. This can sometimes detract, but more importantly, it makes these events extremely expensive to host and to organise. There must be a balance. We are presently getting it wrong. It's why so many less countries are interested in hosting major events. We need to get back to centring the sport with sensible budgets. I say this not to be boring and restrictive, but to be practical. It is the sport with the human stories of triumph over adversity that people remember, bringing the action into our living rooms, inspiring the champions of tomorrow, but hopefully also inspiring a healthier nation as people get back to old habits and try new ones. This is a massive part of hosting any event. What brings our communities together? How the athletes can be used to bring good by changing behaviours and selling our country to the world, building trade and tourism, a shop window with economic benefits to hotels, restaurants, merchandise and transport, all the things that we all know and that we've talked about already. Infrastructure and legacy, though, are also extremely important. We built more 50-metre pools in the 3 years leading up to London 2012 than we built in the previous 30 here in the UK. As a young swimmer, I had to travel from Plymouth to London to be able to swim an Olympic-sized pool. Australia has a policy of building one if they have a community over a certain size. They have 400 50-metre pools in their country, a population of 27 million. I don't know if you'd like to guess how many we have in the UK. It's not even 30. Australia says that residents should live within 15 minutes drive of a public aquatic centre. We're closing pools at the moment at an alarming rate, and in the last few weeks we've seen at least 17 people die from drowning. I've been presenting sport now since the late 80s. The BBC hasn't missed a major sporting event for decades, but recently there has been a huge decline in coverage. They didn't do the World Swimming Championships last year. They are not doing the home Commonwealth Games this year, gallantly rescued by Glasgow, or the European Championships, which are on over in Paris, not even that far away. In fact, swimming, still one of the UK's biggest participation sport, hasn't been on terrestrial television since the Paris Olympic Games. My point is, we hold UK events, we must have it covered on the BBC, and not just on Red Button, radio or hidden online. If public money is being used to bring these events to our country, then the public ought to be able to see it without it being behind a paywall. I had a recent conversation with the BBC, and they aren't covering anywhere near the variety of sports that they once did, including swimming, rowing and triathlon this summer. I was informed last week that the BBC don't expect to cover swimming until the next Olympic Games in LA. That's 4 years in between showing swimming, one of our biggest participation sports, and a sport that saves lives. So it's important to inspire people to want to swim. That's not good enough. Nearly 2/3 of their budget goes on football, whilst every other sport has to scrabble around to get any airtime whatsoever. Surely the job of the BBC is a national service, doing a national job for the whole community. So just to finish, I have two final points, and there's been lots of points to make today, but these are the two that I would like to make. We must bid for fabulous, inspiring, growth-generating sporting events, but we must centre the sport using existing facilities, good university accommodation, reduce peripheral events, and make them affordable. Multi-sports events are hugely popular, the public love them. And secondly, our national broadcaster must cover all major international events that come to the UK, showing a broad spectrum of sports so that young people aren't limited to just the big three. Certain sports are growing, but a lot of the other sports are just disappearing. The disappointment the British swimmer community feels for being abandoned is tangible. I know other sports feel exactly the same way. It makes it really difficult for our hard-working athletes to get sponsorship to stay in the sport if they get no exposure. This doesn't happen in other countries. We are one of the worst countries in the world for showing variety of sport on our terrestrial television. Kids can't be what they don't see, and we desperately need our kids to be inspired. My final thought, and again I don't need to be depressing, but the Commonwealth Games were rescued from Victoria by Glasgow because of cost. And in the next two Olympic Games, there wasn't actually a competition to have them because there wasn't enough countries that bid. There was only one for each one of those games. So we just have to be sensible with the way that we place our bids.
My Lords, I hope colleagues will forgive my rustiness today, because this is the first proper speech that I've made since my long enforced absence from the House. That is apart from jumping up at question time, which I'm tempted to do perhaps rather too often. But I hope I'll be able to contribute. I didn't expect to be following an Olympic swimmer in this debate. I hope I'll do half as good as my noble friend Lord Barber did following Baroness Tanny Gray-Thompson. I'll try my best. I'll also try and avoid saying anything about the nature of Scottish refereeing as a Hearts supporter, but I think you all know what I mean. But can I say I strongly support this bill and the excellent introduction by my noble friend. And I think this bill, together with the draft Ticket Touts bill, is going to help to protect fans from the exploitation that they've been experiencing. It's estimated it'll save £112 million annually, and that the average ticket price that fans will save is about £37 in the resale market. So it's a very important issue. And it is very sensible to legislate for a common set of provisions that can be applied to specific events by secondary legislation, saving time in this Parliament and also particularly in the devolved parliaments. But it is urgent, because as we prepare for the €228 going to be held in, as the Minister said, in the UK and Ireland, it's very important that we have, as the Minister indicated, a common set of provisions on transport planning, on street trading restrictions and commercial exclusion zones. And I think that is a very welcome development. Because the Euros now are so much larger than the competition that I attended in Sweden in 1992, supporting Scotland, of course, and then it was only 8 countries participating. And it was very easy and cheap to get tickets. I actually found myself sitting next to the then president of the Scottish Football Association. That wouldn't happen these days. It was much easier in those days. However, the 9 stadia that are being used in 2028, among them, I fear that Hampden Park is going to be a bit of a letdown for visitors. Hampden Park, unfortunately, is, I think, one of the worst stadia in this United Kingdom in terms of toilet facilities, catering facilities, and it is a disgrace to Scotland that we haven't been able to build a world-class stadium when you see them much, much better in developing countries all around the world. And I would urge issue a plea today to the SFA to do something about it. One other issue that's been drawn to my attention is the number of tickets that are allocated to corporate sponsors at these events. Apparently this happened in Paris with the game between Paris Saint-Germain and Arsenal. And often those tickets are not used, and fans don't find it difficult to get tickets. And I hope that UEFA and other international organisations will look at that to see that if tickets are not going to be taken up by corporate sponsors, they are allocated to fans. And now I'm going to agree, and this is most unusual, with Baroness Evans of Bowes Park. I can't remember the last time, if ever, I agreed with her. But it's nice to be, it shows you what sportsmanship there is here in this bill. Because I agree, I read the suggestion from Alex Kellum and Freya Davey that these events, not one-off events, but regular events can also be included. And I hope the Minister and the Government will look at that. And I think, looking across at Baroness Evans, there sounds like scope for an all-party amendment when we get to committee stage. Can I now come to a wider issue? I wrote a report on football governance, business and values for the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and they agreed that, highlighting the integrity of the world's most popular sport is at risk. And since I wrote it a few years ago, it's got even more at risk, the integrity of football. It's urgent to protect football from rogue actors and commercial exploitation, including agents who are making billions of pounds, some of them based here in London, many of them based here in London, and also from the football establishment itself. As we approach the start of the World Cup in the USA, Mexico and Canada, it's got worse rather than better. Wasn't that appalling? The presentation of the so-called FIFA Peace Prize by Gianni Infantino to Donald Trump, of all people. And also the award of the 2034 competition to Saudi Arabia without competition, in spite of their appalling human rights record. That shows how bad this has become. Money and the greed has taken over. So I hope, and I say to my noble friend the Minister, that beyond what we're discussing today, beyond this bill, our government, the government of the United Kingdom, will take the lead in condemning and counteracting this abuse of football at every opportunity for the good name of the great game of football.
My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow the Noble Old Lord Fawkes and to agree with his highlighting of concerns about the greed and the denial of principles that's been associated with too many major sporting events recently. And that's something I will come back to. I think it's important that this bill acknowledges those risks and those dangers and thinks about what kind of events we're actually going to be hosting. But I want to start by saying what a pleasure it is to take part in what's already been a very rich and informed debate. Major international sporting events are so important to so many individuals for pure joy, for engagement in social activities, for, we hope at least, encouragement to physical activity of their own. And of course, so important to communities to provide new facilities, new infrastructure and new opportunities. But we know in the past that major events have not always lived up to their promises and not always lived up to the hopes that people have held. And this bill is a real opportunity to try and make sure that future events actually do that. I and the Green Party broadly welcome this bill. It's sensible not to have to keep doing a different piece of legislation for each individual event, and this is a practical measure that's clearly heading broadly in the right direction. But I want to associate myself particularly with a number of points made by the noble lady Baroness Bonham-Carter. I thought her point about culture being included in this bill, certainly cultural events associated with sporting events, but I think we could also ask the questions about broader. We have seen so much depletion of the cultural life of this austerity, driven by cultural life of this country, driven by austerity, driven by Brexit, driven by educational suppression of creative subjects, and indeed in some cases by a desire to discourage individual and critical thinking, that it's really important we look to international inspiration, international support to really grow that area. I also share the Noble Lady's concern about that we're not going far enough on anti-ticket touting, and the issues about ensuring that events are protected for free-to-air TV. This is still so important to so many people, even though so much of what people watch now is through the internet, through social media. There's still a lot of people who we cannot leave behind here. I also very much want to agree with and associate myself with the comments of the Labour Lord Holmes of Richmond, and I think an amendment that seeks to ensure that we build in inclusive by design is something that really we should be seeing. And I further have to comment that, reflecting on earlier debates in your Lordship's House, those who are attacking diversity, equity, inclusion measures for ideological reasons really should listen to the Noble Lord's speech to understand how important it is that these measures actually continue. I finally want to, in terms of referring to other speeches, particularly pick up the, as we all expected, immensely powerful and important speech from the Noble Lady Baroness Grey-Thompson, and her point about soft power. And to stress that the nature of the event, how it turns out, and its outcomes for individuals, communities and society are actually really important to how Britain is regarded around the world. This is important in its own terms, obviously, but it's also important for how the world sees us. And I note in that context that the UK Soft Power Council has unfortunately not met, I believe, for 7 months. And a recent Politics Home article described it as drifting towards oblivion. And I think that's disturbing, and I'm not sure if the Noble Lady, the Minister, can comment on that. But I come now to some specific points which may reflect amendments that I may consider putting down to this bill, depending on the Minister's response. First of all, Schedule 2, the advertising provisions. Now, we've already ensured that we remove tobacco sponsorship from sport because of its impact on public health. Should we not also be considering that fossil fuel companies should not be able to advertise and sponsor major sporting events? This is something that has been called for by the UN Secretary-General, who said there should indeed be restrictions similar to those applied to tobacco. And various countries have made progress in this area. France has already banned fossil fuel products advertising from 2022. The Hague has introduced a legally binding ban on fossil fuel advertising in public spaces from 2025. And of course, this is something that many local communities around these islands, including Edinburgh and Sheffield, just to mention two that I know about, have already taken action on. Furthermore, and this is where we can look back to the London 2012 Olympics and Paralympics to really look at some lessons that we might learn from those. The public health in the UK is so poor. Surely if we're going to be putting significance of public investment, which inevitably we will be, into these sporting events, we need to make sure they are not doing significant damage to public health. There should surely be restrictions on the nature of products being advertised or indeed forcibly sold at these venues. And referring back to London, I note that major sponsors were McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Cadbury and Heineken. That was subject at the time to the criticism from a number of senior medical officials, and the London Assembly indeed passed a motion calling for a ban on junk food sponsors. We saw a real problem where food sellers were forced to prominently display Coca-Cola advertising and products with very limited space for alternative products. This, of course, a product linked to high blood pressure, heart disease and obesity. Now, surely this bill should be looking to address some of those issues. Now, the Noble Lady Baroness Bonham-Carter has already given us a sneak preview, and I'm not going to go at length because I'm sure the Noble Lord Foster will be discussing this more, but the issue of gambling sponsorship and advertising has to be considered. And this is, of course, a huge issue when it comes to football. And I'm afraid I'm not going to celebrate the very, very modest measure that next season there's going to be a voluntary ban on the front of shirts for advertising, which is what you might call the minimum possible we think we can get away with. And the economic costs of gambling to the country are very well known, and I'm sure will be rehearsed later. I note that Italy, for example, has banned most gambling advertising through a dignity degree in 2028. And the final point I want to get to is the issue of sustainability standards. And again here, London, unfortunately, 2012 did not live up to many of the promises that were made before the Games on waste reduction targets, on resource use and on use of renewable energy. And again, in the area of food, they failed to use locally grown food and fair trade products, in part again because of the influence of those sponsors and contracted suppliers. So surely we should be, thinking again back to that soft power point, surely we should be ensuring that we produce genuinely world-leading, a phrase popular on both benches of government and opposition in this place. We saw that Paris sought to become the lowest carbon Olympic Games ever, didn't always live up to it. Surely we can do better with Paris in future events, and surely we should acknowledge that those standards, yes, international bodies are starting to mandate those standards, but we can surely demand that events that we cover under this bill go further.
My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow Baroness Bennett, who made lots of very thought-provoking points about wider issues here. And it's also a pleasure to take part in a debate with so many people who've contributed so much to our great sporting legacy. I welcome this bill too. It provides an overarching framework, a one-stop shop, if you like, for major sporting events. And it's important, as many noble lords have said, because sport is so central to our culture and our economy. Here's a couple of stats, one of which is very strange, to bolster the point. We are still in the handful of countries that's always at the top of the Global Sports Index, which measures the scale, reach and impact of sporting events around the world. Here's the strange stat. Just before COVID, the UK had the honour of being the only country in the world whose sporting annual attendance of professional events is greater than its entire population. And a recent UK sports survey showed that 83% of the UK population expressed pride in hosting major sporting events. Getting 83% of the country to agree in anything is pretty extraordinary. So having a framework approach, I think, is sensible to provide efficient delivery, to reduce delay and uncertainty once bids have been successful, and to improve the bidding for events by meeting organising committee requirements in advance. And I think, although a lot of what my noble Baroness Bowles said earlier on, I agree with. I think my understanding is that this is a package to enable bids for international events to be smoother, so I can see some logic in separating out some events from regularly held major events. And in particular, it's good to see action on deterring touts, protecting commercial rights, enabling coordinated transport planning, and saving, admittedly modest amounts of money, but still saving money in the legislative and administrative groundhog day that is involved currently in bidding, in legislation for each new bid that's made. It's also important to note, as other noble lords have done, that this bill is accompanied by other initiatives that, taken together, look suspiciously like a coordinated strategy, a new cross-government programme with sporting bodies on priority infrastructure development, a new cross-sector major event strategy, which will be led, which will be fed into by my noble friend Lord McConnell as the new advisor on sporting events and soft power, and as many noble lords have said, the upcoming ticket touts bill, more on which later. All of this is very welcome. I just want to flag up 4 issues where I think there will be, a lot of interest across the House in probing for more detail. The first is the definition of events, which is not a big issue in policy terms perhaps, but is a tricky issue from an administrative point of view. Clause 3, as we've heard, specifies that the events within scope are those that are held in or partly in the UK, of a kind that are not regularly held in the UK, and likely to be of significant international interest. Now, it's clear that UEFA, FIFA tournaments, Rugby World Cups, international cricket competitions fall in that scope. But what about events such as high-profile title bouts in boxing that are organised in an ad hoc way? What about even the Ryder Cup? Now, the Ryder Cup, as my noble friend Baroness Nye knows very well, is held in Europe every 4 years, but it's no longer held in Britain every 4 years. It's held in different countries. Does that count as qualifying as an event that would be within scope or not? These are not deal-breaking issues, but I think it would be worth hearing what further guidance the Secretary of State will rely on when making decisions. Second issue is ticket touting, and as many colleagues have said, stated intent in the bill is very good. But 3 small issues. One is, how exactly will the steps on eliminating ticket touting in this bill dovetail with the wider treatment of ticket touting that is yet to come? As many have observed, the risk is that measures to deter or prohibit touting for major sporting events now, which takes place in primary legislation, will perhaps be in tension with the broader reform of the resale market, which is in draft legislation and will proceed on a slower basis, and itself will be subject to pre-legislative scrutiny, so may change down the line. So I think there's a question of how we're going to ensure, as a Parliament, let alone as a House, that these 2 pieces of legislation on such different timescales dovetail rather than are in tension. Secondly, and here I'm going to join my noble friend Lord Fuchs in having a pop at FIFA, it's assumed in this bill that the international sporting bodies will want reassurance about the host country's commitment to eliminating ticket touting. But if you follow what's happening with FIFA at the moment on ticket pricing in the upcoming Men's World Cup in the US, Mexico and Canada, there you've got a case of an organising body that is colluding with ticket resale platforms in its pricing policy. They're keeping their official prices ludicrously high, $11,000 face value for a final, $2,500 for USA v Paraguay, knowing that the market clearing price is actually lower, and shifting unsold inventory of tickets through these third-party resale platforms. So there's a new problem here, which is how organising legislation doesn't just deal with ticket touting inflating the price, but an organising committee that may be colluding with resale platforms. And I think that's something that's worth bearing in mind, unfortunately. And lastly, on ticket touting, I think the bill will have to have due care for official fan-to-fan exchange schemes, and those schemes which are going to have to be restructured in response to this and the ticket touting legislation anyway. Again, it's just a gentle thought that the government's view on the steps needed to control resale mechanisms can't trample on perfectly legitimate ticket sharing mechanisms within clubs and within national sports organisations. Thirdly, there are a couple of issues around the reliance on secondary legislation, which Lord Holmes mentioned earlier on as well. I think the House will want reassurance that if event-specific provisions are being triggered by secondary legislation, that there will still be scope for proper scrutiny in issues that arise in the organisation of that event. There's no reason why there shouldn't be, of course. And secondly, the understandable need for clarity on licensing and commercial association has to strike a balance between, on the one hand, protecting property rights, but also continuing to be community-friendly to local businesses, consumers and fans who enjoy and have economic activity around the event. And lastly, fourth issue, the bill covers excellent ground, but as many, including, again, Lord Holmes mentioned, there are issues which are at least worth thinking about as other issues that should be included in this framework legislation. He mentioned the issue of inclusion and issues around technology. And Baroness Bennett earlier on mentioned environmental sustainability issues. Another is safeguarding provisions. There's an issue about whether there should be minimum safeguarding plans, particularly as some of these tournaments may involve under-18 tournaments, for example. The issue of whether there should be dedicated welfare officers. I think there's an issue to be considered about whether that should be baked in as part of the universal set of issues. Anyway, I look forward to engaging more in this debate. It's an excellent bill. It fulfills a manifesto commitment. It's going to be a value across our country and across sports. And my last thing I would urge is that we do not schedule any of the committee stages at times that clash with World Cup.
My Lords, like everybody else, I want to congratulate the Government and the Minister in bringing forward this bill at this particular time. It seems extremely apposite, a World Cup just in play. And it's a privilege too to take part in a debate, as others have observed, featuring some of our Olympian and Para-Olympian heroes. And I can't but also make a reference to the noble Lord Fowkes. It's very good to see him back in his usual position, causing his usual amount of trouble. And can I just reassure the noble Lord that Hearts are now the second favourite team in Brighton. And I'd like to pay tribute to all of the other speakers, but I particularly have enjoyed the noble Lord Barber and his speech. He's known as the noble Lord Barber of Chittlehampton. Well, having heard what he said about cricket, and with my own particular love of cricket, I think he should now be known as Lord Barber of Delivery, and I'm more than happy to come out of my cricketing retirement to test his outside edge. My Lords, this is a simple set of measures, but it will potentially be an enormous long-term benefit to UK sports, tourism, hospitality, etc., making life easier for those who plan and manage large sporting events. The UK, as many have said, has an enviable reputation for the way in which it puts on a show whenever we bid and win major international events like the Olympics, Paralympics, football competitions like the Euros for both men and women. I'm also delighted that the bill begins to address issues like ticket touting, which many of us in the Chamber have over the years raised in different ways and under different guises. It is right too that the government is tackling unauthorised association issues and that it makes transport planning for major events simpler and easier. Like many, it's always been a puzzle to me that each time we stage something like the Commonwealth Games, as they have in Manchester, Glasgow, Birmingham, etc., or the Olympics, new legislation is required, leaving the planners with the uncertainties until Parliament has finished with the bill. It's pleasing to note that the Euro 2028 planning will be made simpler and more straightforward as a consequence of this legislation. As the Minister set out, this bill will make it easier to bid for future events like the FIFA Women's World Cup in 2035. In other words, I don't need persuading of the economic benefits that hosting major events, sporting events, can bring. Living in Brighton, we're familiar with hosting such events. When I was council leader, took the wise decision to host the Tour de France. We were the first city to do so. And we have since played host to the Rugby World Cup, Women's Euros in 2022, and also the Women's Rugby Cup in 2025. The boost to the local economy of all of these events has been enormous. The single stage of the Tour de France alone was worth a net 10 million in 1994, not to mention the added value it gave to the profile of the city as a desirable destination with a value-added spend into local hospitality industries. More recently, it's estimated that the Birmingham Commonwealth Games brought a rough 1.2 billion additional economic output and 80 million of social value. This, along with the soft power benefits that others have referred to, and a sense of social cohesion, better trade and health and wellbeing legacy, brings enormous side benefits. For that reason, I too welcome the recent announcement by the government of a scoping and strategic assessment by UK sport of the potential to host an Olympic and Paralympic Games in the North in the 2040s. As we found in 2012, the economic and social benefits far outweigh the costs. The regenerative potential of major sports is enormous, and the government is to be congratulated for seeing this and putting in place this bill and other measures to tap into the potential. Unsurprisingly, for this reason, the bill has been widely welcomed. Its powers seem proportionate and will enable greater flexibility in the planning of major events. In other words, this is all a long way from the planning and preparation behind the 1966 World Cup. As I recall, a major competition event of this sort was done on a government grant of some £500,000 that Dennis Howell, the sports minister, managed to extract from a reluctant Prime Minister Harold Wilson. Howell's only major obstacle was that games could not be played on Sundays because of the strict Sunday observance laws at the time. Surely Dennis Howell would be rubbing his hands now if he had sight of this bill. In other words, I do have a few minor gripes, and I hope the Minister can put my mind at rest on some points. Your lawyers at Lewis Silken have questioned why the bill, while understandably focused on mega events we compete for internationally, doesn't also cover large and regular events, such as the London Marathon, the Six Nations tournament, the Open and Wimbledon. I might add several other regional marathons, the London to Brighton cycle ride and other cycling competitions. They argue it leaves a gap in these events, collectively bringing enormous value to the UK and are regularly targeted by ambush marketeers. They have a point. They suggest that there's a case for adding provisions to cover the unauthorised association provisions that have impact on regularly held nationally significant competitions. I also wonder if there isn't a bit of tweaking to the bill's long title so that it can cover music events too. UK Music's Tom Kyle has suggested that the ticket touting provisions, for example, could be extended to cover music venues. And it does seem a bit odd, taking measures to counter ticket touts at football and sporting events while leaving music events entirely unprotected. It is somewhat illogical. And why use a bill to consult on these provisions for other issues like music when you've already published provisions in an actual piece of legislation? Perhaps the Minister can explain why this is. The ticket touting offence seems on the face of it pretty all-embracing and properly capturing ticket platforms and marketplaces. The offence also applies to businesses that operate from outside the UK, but where the offence relates to people in the UK, and these conditions seem entirely replicable to musical events. In other words, I support the advertising, trading and unauthorised association measures in the bill, which target illicit commercial behaviour, ripping off the sporting event by association with its brand. My only concern here will be how effectively the relevant offences will be policed, given the resources currently available to weights and measures authorities, the CMA and the other enforcement agencies. Perhaps the Minister can advise us if additional money will be made available to carry out that work. Finally, and turning to the transport measures, I think these should work. I presume that they draw on the experience of the bespoke legislation that worked well for the Olympics, Paralympics and Commonwealth Games. Powers like these would have made, I must say, a Brighton hosting Tour de France section back in 1994 much easier. The route passing as it did through multiple local authorities from Dover to Brighton. The bill makes it clear who exactly has responsibility over transport issues, and this is most welcome. My Lords, like others, I celebrate the introduction of this bill and look forward to further constructive engagement on some of the areas that have been usefully raised this afternoon.
Yeah. My Lords, nearly 100 years ago, my grandfather was an Olympic athlete. In 1932, he asked for time off work to travel to New York and onwards to Los Angeles on the Olympic train alongside all the other European participants. He didn't win a medal, but his performance was featured in the cover story of Track Stats magazine last March. Known as Flying Fuller, he was Britain's fastest man. Now, back then, sport was the amateur game. When he was alive, he told me how the noble Lord Burleigh dropped the baton in the 4x100 relay. It was a shame because he told me they'd practiced the handover in the changing rooms beforehand. It was different times, the epoch of the gentleman amateur. And I mention all of this because sport is grounded in people, in community clubs, the fellowship of teams, the tension of individual competition. It's the great leveller. And we can be proud that Britain has codified many of the great global sports. So I know why this bill is here. The bill's here because the promoters of the truly global events have lobbied for it. I know because I've spoken to some of them. They have their sports rights to defend. They have signed up the big global brands. There are pallet loads of merchandise to shift. And they've told the government that unless they pass this bill, we'll never get another sporting event in our nation. It's nonsense. And that's what I would say if I was them. But we've been suckered by that. Because money often follows sport. But sport cannot be and should not be only about the money. Because what this bill does is make sport all about the money by law. Now, it will be said that we've had similar bills before and in the Olympics, and you'd be right, and a completely bespoke effort was needed and justified. But the Olympics in 2012 was the exception, not the rule. And this bill will make the exception the rule. in an unwanted and unwarranted unnecessary intrusion into our sporting and cultural life. And because each event is different, we'll most likely need special purpose bills for the Crown Jewels events anyway. Now, I'm not against these bills. I welcome the Euro 28 tournament. There will be circumstances and scope which will need to be negotiated. And if this bill pertained to Euro 28 alone, it would have my full support. And as Baroness Gray-Thompson said earlier in this debate, we don't need legislation for many of these events. But providing an evergreen framework, perversely, all this bill does is give away any and all negotiating leverage that we may otherwise have, and especially as Baroness Davies, who isn't in her place, has observed, we could end up bidding against ourselves. It prompts promoters to ask for even more. And counterintuitively, it weakens our ability to land these events because game theory tells you that. Now, it's been said that this bill is just a one-off like the World Cup or the Euros, and that's not what the bill provides for, because as other laws, including the noble Lord Wood, whose comments I'd like to associate myself with, says, it's all a bit woolly. The press notices talk about the big tournaments, but it could end up to the international table tennis, or where there's a fuzzy boundary between sport and entertainment, and wrestling and boxing has been mentioned. All of these are less lustrous than the Crown Jewels. If we pass this bill unamended, then the Rugby Internationals or the Ryder Cup, that Baroness Nye, who's not in her place either, they will all clamour to be included. They're already asking, it's a slippery slope. And that's where I have my problem with this bill, but also with the comments made by Baroness Evans, who seeks to expand the scope still further. Because there's a mission creep here that trespasses on the grittiness, the sweat, the highs and lows, and the visceral untidiness of sport. I'm concerned because there are powers to designate zones around stadiums or other undefined places where trading will be made illegal. So I asked the promoter of one of these events how far that exclusion zone may extend. And he said, well, certainly between the transport interchanges and the stadium. That was his minimum expectation. So, my lords, just consider that 10-minute walk from Twickenham Station to the Alliance Stadium down Whittam Road in southwest London. Every type of food from around the world is available from licensed food vans and stalls set up in front gardens where enterprising homeowners have demolished their garden walls. Old boys selling memorabilia in tat, the little guy with his roadside kebab van, or the youth club with their pop-up gazebo frying chicken wings for a couple of hours before the game. That's part of the grittiness. It adds to the day's pleasure. And yet it is going to be made illegal upon pain of a £50,000 fine, even if they have a licence. Yes, a fine for the burger flippers from the Cubs and Scouts, raising money for the Jamboree, or for the homeowner who's going to be doubly burdened by the mansion tax. You see, under this legislation, only expensive cardboard burgers, plastic tat, and gassy lager sold in soulless, overpriced stadium concourse concessions will be permitted. There are other provisions in this bill to prevent online trading by mobile phone or other internet device at an event. It seems to me that this amounts to a ban on closing out a bet on a game in progress from your seat, in an affront to the fan who likes a flutter. As most apps are based in Gibraltar, I'm not quite sure how it would be enforced anyway. But it gets worse, and I associate my comments with Lord Wood. It will be illegal to pass on a ticket to a friend if your plan changes. Say mum's fallen over at home or whatever. We all want to avoid the bots. But frankly, the ticket sellers and the organisers haven't worked hard enough to stop the scammers hoovering up all the tickets. So rather than sorting this omission at source, the government is going to go after the little guy. If this bill is passed, where will be the incentive to fix this problem? Instead, the fan is going to be forced to surrender tickets to the organisers, who can then resell them for whatever they like, as indeed we've heard in the FIFA World Cup, and by outlawing peer-to-peer platforms like StubHub along the way. I've been told by one of the organisers of one of these Crown Jewels events that fans will be able to surrender their tickets as little as 30 minutes before the game. All that's going to do is encourage hopefuls to turn up at the turnstiles and then be disappointed when 10 minutes before the game there isn't a ticket to buy. You couldn't make it up. If organisers and ticket marketers tried harder on the initial ticketing, we wouldn't need these provisions at all. And I need to ask the fundamental question, what's so bad about exposing for sale an event ticket, the words in the bill, to your Facebook friends? What's so bad that that justifies a £50,000 fine? I also want to know how this legislation will dovetail into the government's consultation on banning 0 hours. At committee, I plan to introduce a carve-out for sporting events, because there are no guaranteed hours in sport, and Fergie time tells you that. Now look, I'm not going to go on about unauthorised association, but it's so loosely defined, it could affect a bed and breakfast operator simply suggesting they're not far from the event or the struggling pub running a tournament sweepstake. This bill will sanitise sport, restrict choice, increase costs and damage the enjoyment of the day. Why can't we see this harms not strengthens our negotiating power? And why have we got it in for the scouts and guides raising money for the jamboree, the bloke who prefers a cheap kebab to an overpriced burger, the bucket hat rather than the baseball cap, the fan who fancies ale rather than lager, or the geezer who just wants to play an in-game bet from the comfort of his seat in the middle of the game? Why are we on the wrong side of our sporting life? This bill is unnecessary. Last week, the Financial Times asserted that the Premier League is a national asset, and they're right. And it's become so without the unnecessary provisions from this bill. It's a sledgehammer to miss a nut, and it is going to reduce the simple enjoyment of the small pleasures of going to the game. Now, I know that part of sport is knowing where you're beaten. And I can tell from the House this evening I'm not going to win this one. But I've made my point. We must guide against mission creep. We must get the balance between the private interest and the public good right. Because if we fail to do so, then the fans at Old Trafford, at Anfield, and those other places where, like Saudi Arabian Gulf, will tell you the unintended consequences of putting the money first and the fans second.
My Lords, the United Kingdom has a proud record of hosting major international sporting events, from the Olympics and Paralympic Games to European Championships and World Tournaments. These events have showcased our country on the global stage, inspired future generations and delivered significant economic and social benefits. This bill seeks to provide a more efficient and consistent framework for hosting such events in the future. Rather than requiring bespoke legislation each time the UK hosts a major international tournament, it establishes a framework that can be applied where appropriate. That is a sensible approach, which should improve certainty for organisers, strengthen our international competitiveness when bidding for events, and reduce unnecessary legislative duplication. With UEFA Euro 2028 on the horizon and future opportunities to host global tournaments, now is the right time to put in place a framework that allows the United Kingdom to move quickly and confidently when opportunities arise. This bill, at its heart, is a practical piece of legislation. In the past, Parliament has needed bespoke legislation for individual sporting events. By establishing a clear framework for future tournaments, the bill reduces unnecessary barriers, streamlines the legislative process, and provides greater certainty for organisers and host communities. I welcome the measures to tackle ticket touting, protect commercial rights, and support effective transport management. Ticket touting can leave genuine supporters priced out and unable to access events. Measures that help to ensure tickets reach genuine fans are therefore welcomed. Sponsors and commercial partners provide significant investments, helping to make major events possible, and appropriate protection can help safeguard that investment. Effective transport management is equally important. The success of major sporting events depends not only on what happens inside the venue, but on whether spectators, volunteers, workers and local residents can move around safely and efficiently. For many visitors,
the transport network provides their first and last impression of a host city. Yet the value of major sporting events cannot be measured solely in economic terms. They also create memories that last a lifetime. They bring families, friends and communities together in shared experiences that become part of our personal and collective story. For me, the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games remains a powerful example. My son still remembers our trips to watch the volleyball and the women's football bronze medal match. Those are memories that remain with us today. The Games also touched on my own family in other ways. My mother, who was retired at the time, took part in both the opening and closing ceremonies of the Paralympic Games. Like thousands of volunteers and performers, she became part of something larger than herself and carries those memories long afterwards. In different ways, 3 generations of my family were able to share in an experience of the London 2012. That demonstrates the unique power of major sporting events, not only to bring people together, but to create memories that are then passed on from one generation to the next. It also serves as a reminder that major sporting events should be as accessible as possible. The opportunity to attend, participate in, or contribute to such events should be available to as many people as possible and should not be limited by circumstances. This is particularly important for young people. For many attending major sporting events, it can be a life-changing experience that sparks a lifelong interest in a sport, volunteering, or physical activity. We should therefore seek to ensure that opportunities to attend such events are accessible and affordable so that young people from all backgrounds can share in the inspiration they provide. Whether through fair access to tickets, accessible venues and transport, or opportunities for volunteering and participation, we should seek to ensure that the benefits of major sporting events can be enjoyed by people from all backgrounds and communities. Seeing athletes perform at the highest level can encourage young people to become more active, participate in sports, volunteer in communities, or simply believe that they too can achieve great things. Major international sporting events can generate economic benefits, support local businesses, inspire participation in sports, and leave a lasting community legacy. I welcome the ambition of the UEFA's Euro 28 organisers to deliver the largest community programme ever associated with the UEFA European Championship. And I believe that this should be an aspiration for all major international sporting events. Success should be measured not only by what happens inside the venue, but by the benefits they leave behind for communities long after the event has concluded. Good legislation should not simply make it easier to host events, it should make it easier for communities to benefit from them. The bill will also strengthen the United Kingdom's position as a destination for major international sporting events. In an increasingly competitive global environment, host nations are expected to provide confidence that the necessary legal and operational frameworks are in place. This legislation helps to provide that assurance. As the bill progresses, I would welcome further clarification from the Minister on several points. First, the bill grants significant powers to ministers through secondary legislation. Can the Minister explain what safeguards will ensure appropriate parliamentary scrutiny? Secondly, what steps will the government take to maximise long-term legacy of major sporting events, particularly for young people, including participation in sports, volunteering, skill development and pathways into employment? Finally, how will accessibility be embedded within future events planning to ensure disabled and neurodivergent people can participate independently and with confidence? My Lords, the greatest sporting events are remembered not simply by who won or who lost. They are remembered because the memories they create, the people they inspire, the legacy they leave behind for communities across our nation. By reducing barriers, streamlining processes and helping the United Kingdom secure future world-class sporting events, the bill will help ensure those benefits are felt for years to come, and I'm pleased to support this second reading.
Yeah. My Lords, I'm slightly perplexed, having sat through the entirety, along with Lord Foster of Bath, of the entire legislative process, minute by minute. There weren't many of us there for the Olympic bill, and recalling what we had to pass. That's certainly not transferable easily, and whether it's done by secondary legislation or by primary legislation, frankly, it was sufficiently tedious.
Giving way, but can I just remind him that during that long deliberation I moved an amendment which changed the title of the bill to the Olympic and Paralympic Bill.
Which was agreed. The point of it is, though, what is the purpose of the bill? And without some amendment, I think this bill could end up being rather ineffective. What is a national sporting event? If there's another Olympics, the Olympic rules change. In essence, you cede your nation to the International Olympic Committee for Olympic and Paralympic 60 days, and they rule. Those rules and the detail will change the next time. The critical issue with the London Olympics and Paralympics was the location. That was the key issue. Everything else needed to be sorted, but without having a location identified, nothing gets off the ground. And Lord Fuchs was quite right. Scotland wants to host a major, say, football tournament. Wherever else it has to do, one thing it has to do that can be planned for now is sort out Hampden Park. The investment and the forward planning are critical. So that's not a criticism of this bill, but it's a question of what is it actually for? It seems to me it should be not for simply major events, but events that have to be bidded for. That's where the competitive advantage is given. I'll give an example. It looks to me like rugby league may be excluded under the definitions there. Well, that's an absurdity. Excluded because we're successful in winning bids for rugby league. But what we're not necessarily successful for, that this bill could assist with, is getting the deals with the locations, the venues, that would allow an expanded rugby league, using different stadiums. With the transport changes, for example, that could revolutionise the possibilities of where the locations would be. And that would be hugely important for the sport, hugely important for the country. So there's going to need to be a lot of detailed scrutiny there. In terms of ticket touting, what is ticket touting? Seat Unique uses dynamic pricing. The price for Everton versus Leeds United last season, this year, was £99. The price for Bournemouth versus Leeds United was £564. They're using dynamic pricing. They have a contract, I think, across the whole of the Premier League now and with Wembley. They're given large numbers of tickets to sell, and they're profiting on dynamic pricing. Now, what is the difference between ticket touting, me selling a ticket to a mate and charging him for the fuel to get down there, or what Seat Unique are doing? And the danger with the detail is if we don't get it right, we're actually encouraging legitimised ticket touting. And that's how organised crime is getting into it. Organised crime is not buying off individuals on street corners. Organised crime is buying significant numbers of Premier League tickets at that level, internationally, and dealing with them. If you want to go to certain stadiums in London, it'll cost you £800. You can be guaranteed a ticket to any match, but you're going to be buying those tickets abroad. That's already there. And you talk to the people who monitor this, including the police, this is serious organised crime. Therefore, getting the detail right is going to be absolutely phenomenal. On trading,
What about the person who at my club writes the square ball fanzine and sells it? £1, £2, prices vary. On the street corner. Are they going to be restricted for certain fixtures because of that? That's the danger of the mission creep that's been referred to. And if we take a stadium like the Emirates, where the local community makes money by entrepreneurship, by selling, either by hiring out facility to memorabilia salespeople, and I know those around my club, they're the real small businesses, the micro businesses. They're not big commercial concerns, they never will be, they never want to be. Or the person who's making the incredible food, rather than the official food. Restricting that in any way would be catastrophic. Some of our big stadiums are in communities who aren't benefiting. We should be doing the opposite and encouraging that kind of sale. As Peter Lowy, developing the stadium at Leeds United Football Club, said to me when he arrived, why can't you buy a kebab or a samosa outside the stadium? Well, that's because the small businesses, they're a distance away if they were brought in. This should be part of the bill, of facilitating that. There is a way of doing this, of allowing the local communities, the fan groups, etc., to actually have a bigger say if it's done well. But that means getting this legislation absolutely right. And so the restricted trading zones are significant. The transport zones, though, that is, to me, absolutely right in how that's conceived. Planning out, if there's going to be a major event, what the transport system should be and the infrastructure and what's closed, and having that planned in advance will give a competitive advantage. If we're proposing we're going to use XYZ stadiums for some kind of international competition, and we've got that in place already, then we have a competitive advantage. And my final point is, the world of sport is changing. I hear on the grapevine, Mr. Musk is after buying a Premier League club. That may well change a few things. The World Club Championship may become a lot bigger, may become annual, may move around the world. A bit like the prime boxing bouts that have been already referred to. These are major sporting events. There are one-offs that are significant. We can build into this the planning for them if we use our ingenuity. And so it's a good bill in principle, but get the detail wrong, it will be a bad bill. And therefore, quite an exciting bill to be going into, because if we get it right, we do build a competitive advantage, but that includes building in the community, building in the fan groups, and building in the infrastructure investment demands so that we begin to win on the big competitions.
I welcome this bill and the opportunity to debate this important legislation which will apply to all 4 nations of our kingdom. My Lords, in an era when our country is so divided on so many fronts, sport retains an almost unique ability to bring people together. The most memorable recent example of this was in 2012, when London played host to both the Olympic and Paralympic Games. For several weeks, many people, often without even a passing interest in sport in normal times, cheered for those in red, white and blue who made us all so proud. My Lords, sport has always played a huge part in bridging divides in Northern Ireland, as all people from all communities rallied around our sporting heroes. Rory McIlroy, only the 6th man to complete the Grand Slam of all 4 major golf tournaments, is the current man of the moment and a source of huge cross-community pride. And over the years, the list of sporting greats from Northern Ireland is remarkable for such a small nation. They include George Best, Dame Mary Peters, Joy Dunlop, Willie John McBride, Pat Jennings, Alec Hastings, I could go on and on. And I say with confidence that there are lots more to come. However, Northern Ireland is being held back by a lack of world-class sporting facilities. The bill before the House today is a sensible measure, and as we know, will create a common legislative framework that can be applied to major sporting events across the United Kingdom. This will include the Euro 2028, with games taking place in England, Scotland, Wales and the Republic of Ireland, but not Northern Ireland. As your Lordships might be aware, Northern Ireland was due to host 5 games, but will no longer do so after His Majesty's Government announced it would not be pumping many millions of pounds into the redevelopment of Casement Park, a derelict GAA stadium. My Lords, I am not going into the details to repeat the arguments around that decision, but I must express my disappointment at the failure of ministers to advance the case for Northern Ireland's National Stadium at Windsor Park to host these games instead, despite its limited capacity. My Lords, a huge opportunity has been wasted, and as far as I can tell, those with the power and influence to stand up for Northern Ireland on this issue have swept this under the carpet, as other venues in Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland gladly accepted the gifts they were offered. Windsor Park proudly hosted the 2021 UEFA Sport Cup, contested by the winners of the Champions League and Europe League, a huge game in the global football calendar. So, my Lords, why is it supposedly not capable of hosting games in Euro 2028? My Lords, in recent years, Northern Ireland has successfully hosted the start of the Giro d'Italia, one of the 3 biggest cycle races in the world. And as Baron Ney mentioned, golf in Scotland. We in Northern Ireland, with some of the best golf courses in the kingdom, hosted 2 Open Golf Championships with record crowds in every single day of the event. We have also recently seen the annual Northwest 200 motorcycle race take place in the Triangle Circuit between the towns of Coleraine, Portrush and Portstewart. Public funding was made available for all these, which is warmly welcome, given the boost to the local economy each of them provided. However, my Lords, what links these events is that they all took place outdoors, and the primary infrastructure occurred around them was temporary, meaning no legacy sporting facilities are left behind for local communities. The bill before us today, if enacted, will provide His Majesty's Government and the involved administrations in Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast with powers to offer financial assistance to support major sporting events and related legacy or social impact initiatives. On the face of it, this is welcome. However, can the noble lady, the Minister, perhaps elaborate on how the new powers will differ from those that already exist? Also, if additional finance is to be made available by the devolved administration, is this money expected to come from their existing coffers, or is there a potential for extra funding to allocate it from central government? Last month, His Majesty's Government committed to introducing a so-called Stadium Regeneration Acceleration, through which it would work with sporting bodies on primary sports infrastructure developed projects in England, such as stadiums, that can help deliver local regeneration with commercial growth. Given that the bill before us today is UK-wide, why can this welcome initiative not also apply to all 4 nations of the Kingdom? My Lords, under the last government, I did everything I could to support the development of a North West Regional Stadium at the Coleraine Showgrounds by backing a deeply impressive application to the Levelling Up Fund. All the indications were that it would be successful, given the absence of a modern stadium in that part of Northern Ireland, the cross-community benefits the scheme would bring to a major catchment area, and the boost it would deliver for one of the most economically deprived parts of the United Kingdom. Sadly, the application was rejected, with the monies instead funnelled off to marginal seats in England. Perhaps that wrong could be righted if Northern Ireland benefits from this new UK-wide legislation. And finally, my Lords, as many contributors have already mentioned, I want to welcome the provision in the bill we are debating today relating to ticket touting, which will apply across the United Kingdom and not before time. This is an area that previous governments have shied away from for reasons which I fail to understand. Ticket prices for major sporting events are already bordering on astronomical, which makes it increasingly more difficult for individuals and families to afford to attend. Making sporting tickets a touting a criminal offence, backed by criminal and civil financial penalties, is certainly the right move. And my Lord, the like Lord Basson and Lord Mann, I hope this initiative is swiftly followed by similarly robust provisions to clamp down on ticket touting for music and other live events, as ministers have promised and the music industry has long called for.
My Lords, I'm delighted to be speaking in today's second reading debate, and I warmly welcome this bill, not only for its substance, but for its ambition. As others have noted, at its heart, this legislation gives us the ability to act with pace and confidence when opportunities arise to host the world's most significant sporting events. It removes the need for repeated event-specific legislation and instead creates a standing framework that allows the United Kingdom to demonstrate bold and timely leadership when required. This may be a small bill, but boy, is it mighty. Now, I should confess that I've not always been a natural sports fan. I am what you might call a fair weather friend. Growing up in Shepherd's Bush, I have at various times and with varying degrees of conviction claimed allegiance to QPR, Chelsea, Brentford and Fulham, often depending on who was doing best at that time. But while my loyalties may have been somewhat flexible, my admiration for national sporting events has always been steadfast. T-shirts, bunting, flags, I'm all in. Because I am an enormous believer in their power, not just to entertain, but to bring people together, to inspire pride and to showcase the very best of our country. And I'm equally passionate about grassroots sport, mostly powered by brilliant volunteers, because we all understand the completely symbiotic relationship between global and local sport, and that brilliance at elite level fuels aspiration at community level. This bill provides the technical framework to help turn aspiration into delivery, ensuring that national successes translate into local opportunities and investments. And of course, my Lords, enabling legislation rightly invites scrutiny. The flexibility that this bill is its strength, but it must also be matched with clarity and appropriate oversight. And as we take this bill through committee, we may want to consider how delegated powers are framed, how ministerial discretion is balanced with parliamentary accountability, and how commercial arrangements and security are applied proportionately. We must also ensure that local authorities are supported, not stretched by these arrangements, because their capacity will be central to the successful delivery. None of these are objections to the bill. They are questions that will help us to be ready for first-class delivery when we are called upon. And my Lord, this bill arrives at exactly the right moment. As many have already mentioned, the UK and Ireland will co-host the UEFA Euro 2028, and there's a clear interest from international bodies in bringing future events such as Rugby World Cup, the Tour de France, and further Cricket World Cups back to this country. These opportunities require government's ability to act quickly, and this bill allows us to do precisely that, strengthening our ability to compete internationally, to put forward credible bids, and to ensure that the benefits of hosting are felt across the whole of the country. And it is those benefits that I want to turn to now, because this is not just about national and global prestige, it's about local impact. And I am proud to live in the London Borough of Merton, which has set out an ambitious vision to become London's first borough of sport. Merton is, of course, as you all will know, home to the All England Lawn Tennis Club at Wimbledon and host to the annual championships, the world's most prestigious tennis tournament and a truly global event. The championships bring around 500,000 visitors to the borough in over 2 weeks, and the tournament brings in about 200 million boost to the London economy, and with particular strong benefits to the local hospitality sector. But Merton's story is not just about global prestige. It's also about what sport can achieve in our communities. And nowhere is that more powerfully demonstrated than in the story of the mighty AFC Wimbledon, a community-based club whose supporters refused to leave the borough when Wimbledon FC was relocated to Milton Keynes in 2002. Instead, fans chose to start again from the very bottom. From borrowed boots and borrowed grounds, this fan-owned club has in 24 years risen 9 football leagues, currently competing in League One with a continuous ambition to go higher. Its new stadium in Plough Lane is a symbol of community resilience, but also a driver of local economic activity, with match days bringing hundreds of thousands of pounds into the surrounding area. Its women's team is one of the fastest growing parts of the club in bringing in new audiences, and I do now am a very strong supporter of AFC Wimbledon. I have found my loyalty, and it is deeply encouraging to see not only young girls but young boys supporting women's sport with equal enthusiasm. Building on this legacy, which I just think is remarkable, Merton Council has developed a powerful programme of grassroots activity under the banner of the Borough of Sport. It has delivered 45 separate initiatives open to residents of all ages and abilities to improve the outcomes of people in their local communities. And these events have ranged from a sports day that attracted 20,000 visitors, trying out 70 different sports, all demonstrated by enthusiastic grassroots organisations. Free swimming every week for over 65s and under 16-year-olds in the school holidays. Improved cricket pitches, new basketball courts and outdoor gyms. A world-class BMX track, which boasts an Olympic standard pro start gate, which will make the track eligible to host national or international competitions. I hope the Minister is listening. 27 sports equipment loan boxes with footballs, rugby balls and tennis equipment available to borrow for free. Exercise classes in parks and libraries, and bringing the incredible and hugely popular park run and junior park run to the borough. These are real achievements, and the impact has been tangible. 8,000 previously inactive residents are now taking part in sport and physical activity. That's not a statistic, that's a transformation. This is people who are physically healthier and whose mental well-being has been improved, and their sense of loneliness has been decreased because of this activity. I just want to say this hasn't come about by accident, but it's come about under the leadership of the Labour leader of the council, Ross Garrard, and his team. And I also want to say, on an election day, which was quite tough for people on this side of the bench, Merton was the only borough in the country where Labour made gains, and I wonder if there's a thread that runs through this. And I applaud Merton for their efforts. My Lord, this is why the bills matter, because major sporting events are not just ends in themselves, they are catalysts. They drive participation, support regeneration and generate economic growth. They inspire young people to get involved, to try something new and to see themselves as something better. They provide moments for national celebration and sometimes, sadly, for commiseration. When we host well, we leave a legacy that is felt not just in stadiums, but in parks, schools, leisure centres and community clubs. This bill gives us the tools to do that more consistently, more confidently, more economically and more effectively. It ensures that when the UK hosts the world events, the benefits can be felt anywhere, from global centres like Wimbledon Tennis Club to the grassroots initiatives in communities like mine in Merton. My Lords, this is a bill that enables ambition, strengthens capability and unlocks potential, and I am very, very pleased to support it.
Yeah. My Lords, I too am a supporter of Queen's Park Rangers, though perhaps a slightly more steadfast one than the previous speaker. I want to raise an issue that at first blush doesn't appear to be within scope of this bill, but for reasons I'll set out, I believe it is. Namely the overuse of football banning orders. Football banning orders were originally introduced by the Football Spectators Act 1989 for the purposes of preventing violence and disorder at football matches. It was a targeted measure intended to be used sparingly since it imposes such wide-ranging restrictions on a person's liberty, not just preventing them from attending football matches, but from using public transport on match days, drinking at pubs, near football stadiums, even, in certain circumstances, travelling abroad. Breaches of these orders, which can be imposed for as long as 10 years, carry serious consequences, up to and including being sent to prison. Predictably, subsequent Acts of Parliament have hugely extended the football banning order regime. The Football Offences Act 1991, the Football Spectators Act 2000, the Unauthorised Entry to Football Matches Act 2026 have all added numerous offences to Schedule 1 of the 1989 Act, which sets out the criminal offences that can result in banning orders, with each addition lowering the threshold. Recent statistics lay bare the direction of travel. As of the 1st of June 2025, there were 2,439 football banning orders in force in England and Wales, an increase of 12% on the previous 12 months. Those figures are taken from a recent article in the Law Society Gazette, which raised the alarm about the overuse of these orders. Quote, "Behaviour that is fleeting, non-violent, and often part of the charged emotional atmosphere of live sport, momentary lapses of judgment, reactive shouting, or ill-considered gestures, is being treated with a level of seriousness that risks losing all sense of proportion. Individuals of good character, with no previous convictions, suddenly face a criminal record and permanent implications for employment, immigration status, travel, and reputation. This trend uncomfortably blurs the line between maintaining public safety and over-policing the ordinary realities of live sport."
Minister who took the 2000 legislation through your Lordship's House. That legislation was widely praised at the time as a way of tackling the outrageous behaviour of England fans travelling across Europe in the Euro 2000 competition. It changed forever the attitude of football fans in this country, and it also helped to reverse the tide of racism that had been partly engendered by that. And I think the noble lord should think long and hard before he starts to seek liberalising, as he might put it, that piece of legislation.
I thank the noble lord for that intervention. I wouldn't dispute that there were serious problems that football banning orders were originally designed to address. My point is that they're now being used far more extensively than were intended in the legislation you took through this House for much more trivial misdemeanours, nothing like travelling abroad in order to cause violence and disorder at games overseas. My lords, I should declare an interest. The Free Speech Union, the organisation I run, is currently defending a young football fan who's being prosecuted for calling some Chelsea fans rent boys at a match earlier this season. This was in the context of an exchange of insults between rival fans, and none of the Chelsea fans complained, and it's unlikely, to put it mildly, that any of them were caused harassment, alarm or distress, which is what he's being charged with. Nevertheless, the prosecutor has informed the court that if our member is convicted, she'll be seeking a banning order. His hearing isn't due to take place until September 2027, and in the meantime, he's been banned from his team's stadium for the duration of the 2026-27 season, and told that if he wants to keep his season ticket, he has to continue to pay for it, over £1,000 a year, and cannot resell his seat or pass it on to a friend or family member. The club, meanwhile, it's a Premier League club, is allowed to resell his seat, and judging from the fact that it was occupied for the remainder of the last season, is already doing so. My lords, this is a disproportionate punishment for behaviour which, to quote from the Law Gazette, was fleeting, non-violent, part of the charged emotional atmosphere of live sport, a momentary lapse of judgment. He has never been in trouble with the police before, yet in addition to not being able to watch his beloved team for the whole of next season, he faces the prospect of a 5-year banning order if he's convicted. Even the noble lord would not, I'm sure, regard that as a proportionate penalty for a momentary lapse of judgment. So why do I think an amendment raising the banning order threshold is within scope of this bill? For one, my lords, it's perfectly possible that the new criminal offences created by this bill will be added to Schedule 1 of the Football Supporters Act 1989. Could a street trader selling unauthorised merchandise outside a Wembley match, or a food vendor without a clean zone licence, end up being banned from attending football matches? And can the noble Baroness, the Minister... Sure.
Just for a moment. You made the point just momentarily ago that a trader with a licence, or without a licence rather, could be banned. On the face of this bill, even if you have a licence, you are still subject to a fine up to £50,000. So having a licence is of no consequence in this bill. You can follow all the rules, you can be licensed by the local council, but it counts for nothing. It's another infringement upon trade.
I thank the Lord for that intervention. He makes the point I was trying to make even more forcefully. So even those with licences, nevertheless, being unauthorised to sell merchandise or food or drink outside a stadium could find themselves being given football banning orders if they're convicted of one of these new criminal offences. And even if there's nothing on the face of the bill as drafted before our House today that says these offences could be added to Schedule 1, what guarantee do we have that they won't be added during committee stage, as has happened as I've followed the passage of various bills through this House numerous times before? The bills change a good deal. I would not be at all surprised if those offences were added to Schedule 1 and anyone convicted of them could be subject to a football banning order. Perhaps more importantly, there's nothing in law to prevent football banning orders being imposed on fans visiting from overseas. The purpose of this bill, we've been told, is in part to prepare the country for the 2028 UEFA Men's Football Championship, which, as we've heard, will take place in England, Scotland, Wales and the Republic of Ireland. An amendment limiting the circumstances in which banning orders can be imposed on fans, including those visiting from the continent, will make Great Britain a more attractive destination in 2028 for lovers of the beautiful game. For those reasons, I hope to table an amendment at committee reversing the expansion of the authoritarian banning order regime.
I broadly welcome this bill, but I'm going to focus on the things that particularly interest me. When I look at the bill, it says the government announced it commissioned UK Sport to carry out an initial strategic assessment whether the UK could host an Olympic and Paralympic Games. Assessment will look at potential cost. And the government said funding would not be used for regenerating stadiums, but the government would work with sports clubs and leagues to unlock opportunities for large-scale housing delivery, jobs, apprenticeships, transport improvements and community sports facilities. And I think those are really worthwhile objectives which will benefit young people, benefit the community as a whole. And further on in the bill, it says that the local government association called on the government to join up its ambitions to be a world-leading host of major sporting events, with its ambitions to tackle physical and economic activity, providing more funding for public leisure facilities. It said more investment was needed to develop and refurbish leisure facilities, which it said helped people be physically active, stay in work, contributed to the economy and provided the essential infrastructure for grassroots sports. Now, there may be lots of disagreements for many other aspects of this bill, but I wouldn't have thought that anybody would disagree with those of objectives in terms of, well, what I would say is getting young people off their screens and onto the greens. So, for me, some of the things that are contained in this bill, which are not some of the most major things that we perhaps have been talked about, where I'm sure there's going to be a lot of exchanges and amendments. But it also talks about financial assistance for sporting events. Clause 25 would give the Secretary of State the power to give financial assistance such as loans, grants, guarantees or indemnities to support a sporting event taking place in England for any purpose connected to or arising from such an event, and refers to Scottish ministers and Northern Ireland departments have the same power for events taking place in Scotland or Northern Ireland respectively. The government has stated that allowing financial assistance to be given for purposes connected to the sporting event would ensure it could be used for things such as legacy programmes, social impact initiatives, in addition to supporting the actual operational delivery of the sporting event. And it seemed to me that whatever else we may argue about in this bill, and it's quite obvious that there's going to be significant differences of opinion, I think the government's intention, quite frankly, are sound and worthy. They're obviously going to be developed as the bill goes along. But for me, anything that gets young people involved in sport is worthy of support.
Hear, hear. My Lords, today marks a critical milestone in the preservation and elevation of our country's status as a leading host of major sporting events. We're embarking on a golden decade of sport, from the roar that will greet UEFA Euro 28 football championships to our ambitious bid for the 2035 FIFA Women's World Cup, and onto a potential 2040s Olympic bid for the north of England. This government is readying the United Kingdom to show the world that we are ultimate home of global sport. For decades, this nation has welcomed global sporting fans with open arms, providing the stage for moments of historic athletic achievement that inspire generations, promote healthy living, and drive economic growth into our local communities. This sporting events bill also directly delivers on the government's manifesto promise to bring these high-profile international events to our shores. By creating a permanent, streamlined framework, it signals to international sports bodies that the UK is permanently open for business, operationally secure, and ready to build a legacy. I warmly welcome that this bill explicitly puts fans first. If I may indulge your Lordship's House, as I stand in this chamber today, I am struck by a profound sense of personal history. I rise today as I rose for the very first time in the European Parliament back at the turn of the millennium as a member of the Friends of Football group. More than a quarter of a century ago, I stood up in Brussels to sound the alarm about ordinary football fans losing out from attending matches because of the opaque, predatory ticketing practices. Because of that history, I'm heartened to see the mechanisms within this bill. Under Clause 1, the Secretary of State can designate qualifying events, unlocking the enforcement powers we desperately need. Most crucially, Clause 2 sets up a robust UK-wide criminal offence targeting the unauthorised resale of tickets. This is an essential step forward. We have all seen the grotesque excesses of the secondary black market. During the 2022 Champions League final, standard category tickets with a face value of £60 were being resold online for over £9,000, a staggering 150-fold markup that completely locks out genuine and ordinary supporters. Even in our domestic games, tickets for regular Premier League final day fixtures routinely skyrocket by 1,000% on predatory secondary platforms within minutes of selling out. This is not a free market, it is an extortion. However, while I fully support the architecture of this bill, it is the duty in this House to think creatively. And if we are to successfully enforce Clause 2, we must back it up with total market transparency at the primary point of sale. If we truly want to protect fans, they must know exactly what they are paying for. I must therefore press the Minister on some fundamental questions about transparency that this text currently omits. Why does this bill not explicitly mandate the original fixed face value price be permanently visible and immutably displayed on the face of every single digital and physical ticket issues for qualifying events? How can a fan easily spot an illegal secondary markup under Clause 2 if the baseline price is obscured behind a shifting digital platforms? And how can consumers make an informed choices when hidden platform fees, processing markups and shifting price points are obscured from view until the very final click? Why has the government omitted a ban on dynamic pricing, the corporate euphemism for legalised primary touting, as Lords Mann and Bassam have eloquently highlighted, where prices skyrocket mid-transaction simply because a fan is waiting in an online queue? My Lords, that brings me to a significant omission in the scope of this legislation. While it beautifully safeguards international tournament, it is a great pity that this bill does not extend its protections to our everyday domestic sporting fixtures or world-renowned live music events. A fan being ripped off for a cup final or grassroots local derby deserves the same statutory shield as an executive sitting at Euro 2028 match. Similarly, a young music lover trying to buy a ticket to see their favourite band at a local arena faces the exact same automated harvest bots and predatory pricing platforms. Live music and domestic sport are the lifeblood of British culture, and leaving them exposed feels like a missed opportunity to create a truly comprehensive consumer protection standard. So furthermore, while Clause 5 provides necessary enforcement powers to local authorities and police to stamp out illicit trading, we must also connect these grand international events back to the communities that host them. A major tournament should not be an island of corporate wealth. The financial successes of these global events must directly feed down into our local youth clubs and grassroots sports facilities, as stressed by Baronesses Paul and Dacres. I think our local clubs are where the next generation of athletic talent are discovered. That is where healthy living is fostered and where community cohesion is built. I want to ensure that the regulatory framework we are debating today explicitly guarantees that a percentage of tournament revenues are funneled directly into sustaining these vital community assets. My Lords, this bill has the potential to be a historic piece of legislation. It honours a vital commitment, cuts through needless red tape, and guarantees our supporting future. I do not wish to delay this legislation, but I do want to urge the Minister to take another look at some of the specific areas that I mentioned earlier. Let us work together to expand our horizons, think outside the box, and use this opportunity to shine a light on pricing transparency, protect the wider cultural economy, and ensure that local fans and grassroots communities remain the beating heart of British sport. I commend this bill to the House.
Before I make my comments in relation to the bill, can I firstly make one or two observations in relation to speeches that have been made earlier this evening? Firstly, I'd like to welcome back Lord Fowkes on behalf of the whole Chamber. I think we are all very pleased to see him delivering a speech in his normal style, I think would be the best way to describe it. And I think Lord Wood made reference to the fact that nothing could create 80% of a nation taking one view or another. I think there are occasions when referees' decisions could achieve far more than 80% almost unanimity in relation to things. And I say that for those who are unaware of the fact that I was myself a rugby referee for many years. Can I also make the observation that Baroness Tony Gray-Thompson has probably introduced a new sport into the Olympic world, which is getting from one end of this chamber to the other via a division lobby at a speed she said wasn't anywhere near what she used to achieve. But I can assure you I was amazed because I watched her leave, and then no sooner had she seemed to leave that she'd returned almost immediately at the other end. I welcome this bill enormously because it is intended to enable people, organisations to come together to make bids for major sporting events. And I don't intend to repeat my comments, repeat comments that so many other people have made. We are proud of our sporting tradition. My noble friend Lord Young made a comment in relation to a particular case, and I'm not in favour of woke policy and restricting people's observations. I would merely make the observation that I am wearing the tie this evening of the world's first gay rugby club. And atmospheres generated in crowds, in one form or another, reflect on a community. And I find it completely unsurprising that there is not one professional footballer who is out and gay because of much of what goes on in football stadium, credited as general banter. And I say that as somebody who is distinctly not woke. Coming to the bill in general, I said that I support the bill, as do I think everybody who's spoken, because it enables sporting events to be brought together. Lord Barber made reference to the fact that he was present at the England-Mexico match in 1966. I was also present at that game, along with two other young boys with my father. Sport is supposed to bring you together. The three boys persuaded my father to take us to the Mexico Games. It achieved a great degree of unanimity amongst the four males that watched that match. The only problem was that when we got home, we discovered that my father had forgotten that he was supposed to be hosting with my mother a dinner party. On that occasion, sports certainly did not bring certain parts of my family together. Sport is an international operation. I recognise people's loyalties in one form or another. The bill is intended to clear certain barriers so that we can bid. But there is a serious risk in this bill, which has been identified by speakers from a number of, from different benches in the chamber, about overstretch, overreach. Yes, okay, fine, let's do this. Let's make it possible to have international events here. But international events are precisely that. They are international. And start trying to set down terminology in our legislation in this country achieves one thing, and Lord Mann made the point very, very forcibly. It frightens people away and they go and host events elsewhere. Don't try and do something because it sounds nice to ban touting, when actually, as Lord Mann so ably identified, much of the problem with ticket resale, for example, is actually outside our shores. And exactly the same on the other direction as Lord Fuller's identified. And that is, if you try to have blanket bans around stadia, it's a very risky process. because it impacts on all sorts of small businesses who are there and operate very effectively every time there is a major event. So, as far as I'm concerned, the original objective of the legislation is absolutely clear. I support the questions that have been raised by Lord Bassam and others as to why music events are not covered on the same basis as sporting events, because it makes sense. And I envisage that if it isn't done now, we'll be here debating a piece of legislation which will drag those areas into the same piece of regulation in some form or another. But please do not try and overreach the piece of legislation because it sounds good, because it won't achieve what people want, because sporting events are international. They cannot be regulated into existence in this country. We need to do what we can to achieve the best for this country in terms of sporting occasions, but not go beyond that and frighten people off or say, well, we've done this, and think that actually we haven't done anything at all because it's outside our capacity to regulate. And one noble baroness will have identified that I've not gone into one sphere, which I have a feeling that she's just about to, and that is the bid by Bolton elsewhere for the Ryder Cup at a later stage, about which I don't think there's been any reference whatsoever during this debate. So I welcome the bill, but there are very grave risks associated with this, with the bill, if we try and overreach in one direction or another.
My Lords, I am tempted to follow what Lord Hayworth was saying, but not quite in the way that he suggested. I was tempted to follow up on what he'd said about referees, particularly in the Scottish context, not least because it was my Scottish team, Motherwell, that actually bore the brunt of some of the difficult decisions that were made. But I would just refer to the other point that Lord Hayworth mentioned about the difficulty that footballers seem to have in coming out as gay. And I would suggest to Lord Young that that is one of the reasons why we need banning orders, because there has been so much homophobia as well as many other problems within football in recent years. Turning to the...
Without wanting to defend in any way the remark that our member made in the heat of the moment, in the context of an exchange of insults with a rival group of fans, in which none of those other fans complained, none of them said or showed in any way that they were upset or offended by the remarks. Absolutely no evidence that they were in fact gay. They were just Chelsea fans. Do you nevertheless think, does the noble lady nevertheless think, that a 5-year banning order, if he's convicted, involving draconian restrictions on his liberty, is an appropriate, proportionate punishment?
I know nothing of the detail of what was said, the circumstances or whatever, but I would say as someone who attends football matches in many stadiums, have done over many years, there are some very unpleasant things that happen, and we do need to have the ability to have football banning orders where appropriate. Turning to the bill, virtually everybody has welcomed it, and I do as well. I think it's necessary that we have as much power as we can to make sure that events such as Euro 2028 go well. Many people have spoken about the importance of different sports generally, to the economy, to societies, to the whole psyche of the country. When I think about sporting events, because of my particular interests, I do, of course, think of football. Members opposite are smiling because they've heard me talk about this on many occasions. It is important to my family, and during the football season, I think that each of us looks at the football results and know which of our colleagues are going to be smiling on a Monday morning. It's a very good test. I have to say that I am still smiling, and I apologise to Lord Stoddart for mentioning this, but 10 days ago I was at Wembley with my family when Bolton Wanderers won promotion to the Championship, and Baroness Morris and myself were comparing notes on this just a little while ago. Football is important, and the preparations that are being made for Euro 28 are important, but there are some issues within this bill that other colleagues have raised that I think are worth just emphasising, because although we, I think, more or less all support the bill, there are aspects to it that we think perhaps could be tightened up and go a little further. I will mention ticket touting, which has been mentioned by many others. I think there's been an impression that ticket touting is a series of one-off events, whereas in fact it is actually an industry, and a pretty big one, and my noble friend Lord Mann called it organised crime. So I think it's right to take action. I would ask the Minister if she is sure that the penalties are actually severe enough, given the nature of the people that we are talking about. And like many others, I would like to see this apply to domestic competitions and to non-sporting events as well. This bill has been mentioned, just does apply to international events. It means that we can't talk or amend it in ways that we might want to cover domestic situations, but I do think that we can learn from some of the problems that we have in domestic sporting events to try to make sure we get some of these things right. And I do want to say a word about advertising, which has been mentioned. Advertising is not a straightforward issue, and it's not one that's completely in control of the government, because there are international contracts. FIFA, UEFA, any governing body will do their own deals on sponsorship and advertising, and then of course companies will spend a great deal of money and effort circumventing those restrictions. I do acknowledge that it's a complex problem, but I think that the government are actually thinking along the right lines here. Over the recent years, we've had lots of changes and lots of dire warnings about what would happen if we banned certain types of sponsorship. I remember the discussions about football and tobacco, and I remember the threats that we were told existed when Formula One was forced to give up tobacco advertising. It was supposed to be the end of Formula One. It wasn't. But it is a really difficult issue because it is a very changing picture and a very different and challenging situation. Baroness Bennett mentioned that next season in the Premier League, it will not be allowed to have betting companies on the front of shirts. It's welcome, it's a small measure. It's probably because they feared something more draconian. But at the same time, some clubs are now saying, well, we'll have betting companies on the front of our training shirts, which are also very visible and seen by many people, and indeed replicas are bought. And I mention that because, not because it's covered by the bill, but it does illustrate the kind of changing nature of the challenge that is facing. It is a moving target, and it's the same with gambling. We are soon to see prediction markets being regarded as products, and the Gambling Commission here in the UK has regarded prediction markets as a betting intermediary, so it would be covered, but it's not classified as such in other countries. So again, there is always going to be a problem on implementation and a real challenge for the government and those who monitor sporting events. Now, the other issue that I want to raise is transport.
The bill enables the Secretary of State to direct someone to prepare a transport plan in connection with the sporting event. Very sensible. I welcome this, and I wish we had such plans for more sporting events, especially domestically. But the bill does seem to concentrate on roads. And, you know, we do need plans for roads, I'm sure. But I'm old enough to remember when there were cup final specials, trains which went from the towns that were playing in the cup final. Now, almost every big event at Wembley is marked by train travel problems. And indeed, the match that I was at 10 days ago, fans from Bolton had to be advised to make alternative arrangements because of the difficulty of getting to Wembley for 1 o'clock on that particular Sunday. The day before, when the championship playoff was being held, there were no trains whatsoever from Middlesbrough to London. So therefore, again, no coordination, making it difficult.
I understand she's advocating for the events that would fall within the ambit of this bill for a prevention of strike action, because I think that would be welcomed by many people to save the inconvenience that she mentions and would actually do a lot to level the playing field.
I think the noble member is barking up the wrong tree. On this occasion, there were no strikes involved in those disruptions.
Thank you for giving way, my lady. I was wondering whether you was advocating for Great British Railway to unite the railway company so that it's all under one umbrella.
Well, I had thought of raising this issue with our noble friend Lord Hendy, who seems to be on top of all of those issues. I would just point out one other anomaly, despite the time, if I may, because literally the biggest game in English women's football was held last week at Wembley, the Women's Cup final, and there was no service to Wembley on the Lioness line. How ironic is that? So I welcome this bill, I welcome its proposals, but please can we have some domestic lessons that are learnt from this as well, and some domestic improvements, because there are many problems that are challenges them on the domestic front as well as on the international.
My lords, until the noble Lord Hayward spoke, I was beginning to feel incredibly isolated in your lordship's chamber. As a rugby fan, only 2 of us have now mentioned rugby as a major sport. Can I begin by thanking the noble lady, the Minister, for her excellent introduction to this very important bill, and for the praise that she gave to the important work of the late Tessa Jowl. It was, in fact, through her that I was able to join the noble Lord Holmes as a member of the 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Board. And as the noble Lord Mann said, long before 2012, a great deal of work had to be carried out to provide the necessary legislation. And so had we had the event-agnostic common legislative framework that is proposed in this bill already in place, much time would have been saved. So while I want to propose a few additions, I fully support the bill, as I do the proposal from my noble friend Baroness Bonham-Carter that international cultural events be included alongside sporting events. And like the noble lady Baroness Paul of Shepherd's Bush, I very much hope that the secondary legislation that will follow will lead to measures that are proportionate and so won't lead to situations like the one in 2012 when a butcher had to dismantle his window display with strings of sausages in the shape of the Olympic rings. And 2012 also made me realise the vital importance of tackling ticket touting. It's an issue I've progressed in other places at different times. And notwithstanding the important point about the international aspect of ticket touting, I'm genuinely pleased that the government is taking action on this, including within the bill. Now, I want to raise, if I may, just 2 issues. One that's been foreshadowed by the noble Lady Baroness Bennett on gambling advertising, and the other on sports rights. And I declare my interest as the Chair of Peers for Gambling Reform and as a member of the All-Party Group on Intellectual Property. Now, my lords, I genuinely believe that we should all be worried about living in a country with 1.4 million people, including 80,000 children, suffering gambling disorder, with individual lives destroyed, families and communities impacted, and tragically far too many gambling-related suicides. And the noble lady, the Minister, is well aware of my concerns about gambling advertising and its ubiquitous presence within sport. Time doesn't prevent me to detail all of my concerns, not least those about the impact on children and young people who are constantly being led to believe that the enjoyment of sport is closely linked to gambling on outcomes within sporting events. Now, in this country, we have more research on the links between gambling advertising and gambling harm than almost any other country. And that research shows gambling advertising leads people to start gambling, existing gamblers to gamble more, and those who've stopped gambling to start again. And this is especially irrelevant during major sporting events, when the volume of gambling advertising and illegal black market gambling advertising grows massively, leading to increased gambling harm. And just this Monday, the Nationwide Building Society published research showing that 83% of 18 to 24-year-old existing gamblers expect to gamble more during the World Cup, a quarter of them saying that they will do so to hopefully get more money to pay essential bills. So what can be done? Section 8 of the bill, which has been referred to already, enables the establishment of restricted advertising zones around designating sports events and regulation of what advertising activity may take place within those areas. But these provisions currently appear to primarily be intended to deal with ambush marketing and to protect official sponsors and commercial rights holders. But I believe this should go further. The noble Lady Baroness Taylor raises a concern about what the other international bodies say about this. And of course, it's worth reflecting that the IOC has always maintained a strict clean venue policy that prohibits sports betting and gambling sponsorship associations with the Olympic and Paralympic Games. FIFA also has a similar clean venue policy for the Men's World Cup, and several other international sporting bodies have rules which allow domestic bans in host countries to supersede their own rules. So I hope the government will consider adopting a similar clean venue policy in the bill so that no gambling advertising is allowed in the restricted advertising zones of the events covered by the bill. And additionally, if UK TV and radio coverage of such an event is by a commercial broadcaster, I hope the government will also consider banning gambling ads during transmissions, or at least until the watershed. And many other countries, Italy, Belgium, Australia, many others, have adopted far more stringent safeguards where gambling advertising and sport intersect. And I genuinely believe we should be doing the same. And if I can turn to the other issue of sports rights, in addition to the many other benefits that have already been referred to, the sports sector is now a major economic powerhouse for the UK, and at a time when we need to promote growth, sports can help support that in many ways, from tourism to event management and so on. So it is vital that this bill ensures we have the best framework to support relevant sporting events. Now, the bill includes measures to ensure sports event organisers have the right to ensure that those seeking association with the event must have the correct permissions in place and in many cases pay for that association. In most cases, this is easy to arrange and police. For example, spectators, broadcasters and sponsors all have clear conditions and payment arrangements. However, despite the enormous profits that gambling companies make from bets on sporting events, With the exception of horse racing, with its horse race betting levy, there is no explicit statutory requirement for gambling companies to pay sports organisations for betting rights, an issue that I hope separately from this bill the government will consider. To get round that, many sports organisations do attempt to assert copyright and database rights over their fixtures and statistics, and gambling operators enter into voluntary commercial data agreements to purchase official data to ensure they have fast and accurate betting markets. So, for example, data, and I'll use football rather than rugby since that's what everybody's talking about, data from the English and Scottish Premier Leagues and the EFL is licensed through Football Data Co. to Genius Sport, who then sell that data to other parties, including gambling companies. But unlike a specific sport right, these are voluntary arrangements, and they're much less easy to enforce. Indeed, enforcement is even harder when sports data is often scraped by third parties and sold to betting companies without the permission of the sporting event, who have little or no means of redress. Now, the noble Lord Barber of Chittlehampton told us earlier that he's been the chairman of Somerset County Cricket Club, and speaking to me only on Monday, he told me about the efforts the club makes to prevent the activities of in-ground so-called data scouts who feed micro-level match data, such as ball-to-ball outcomes, to whoever will pay them, whether gambling companies or betting syndicates. More sophisticated operations also exist, especially as it happens in horse racing, where people are using drones to capture data which they then sell without agreement from the organisers of the event. Now, when this happens, there are potential integrity issues, and certainly the sport event loses potential income. So in relation to association measures, will the noble lady the Minister ensure that this is addressed in the bill by firstly ensuring tough penalties to those who capture data without permission, and secondly by requiring gambling companies to only use data licensed to them by official sources? I hope that can be extended more widely as well. This is a very welcome bill. I'm delighted to support it.
My Lords, it's a pleasure to rise to speak today on this bill and listening to so many great contributions from noble lords, including people I consider sporting legends. And I rise to speak also as someone who represents Wembley and live in Wembley, the home of football and more recently rugby, American football and the Olympics. A place has been for over a century sat at the intersection of sport, culture and community, which in that time has taught us everything we need to know about why legislation like this matters and why getting it right is so important for the future of major sporting events in this country. Now, let me begin with a confession. When you mention you represent Wembley or Brent, people assume you spend your time watching England triumph gloriously in the stadium. The reality is somewhat different. You spend time explaining to visitors that the Jubilee line is in fact faster than driving, and that no, they cannot park outside your house. But here's the thing, that chaos that ensues, that wonderful, maddening, economically significant chaos, is exactly what this bill is designed to protect and nurture. My Lords, before I turn to the economics and legislation, I hope the House will permit me a moment of sentiment, because Wembley is not merely a stadium. It is the chapter of our national story, a chapter that belongs and proudly to the London Borough of Brent, and it's precisely why of what Wembley represents to this country, to sport, to culture, that this bill matters so much. And I'm sure everyone sitting here, our noble lords, will have their own Wembley memories, including going to Bolton and seeing them elevated up to the next league up. In Brent, we know what we have. We hold this treasure with enormous pride. Wembley is not just our local stadium, it is a global icon that happens to be in our neighbourhood. For a venue like Wembley to continue attracting the events that has made these moments popular, the UK needs to be able to offer international governing bodies something no amount of goodwill alone can provide. Legal certainty, commercial protection and a framework that works. This is what this bill will deliver and why it matters. In 2018, the Football Association commissioned Deloitte Sports Business Group to assess the economic impact of Wembley Stadium events. Their findings presented to us at Brent Council show that the 58 events staged during the 2017-18 season resulted in a total economic impact to England of over £650 million and a direct economic impact to the borough itself of £150 million. These events supported over 1,800 full-time equivalent jobs in Brent and over 6,000 across England as a whole. Now multiply that across every major international event in the UK that the UK could host, and consider what is at stake if we fail to make ourselves competitive. Every event that goes to another country rather than ours is not just a missed occasion, it is missed jobs, missed investment, missed opportunities for communities like the one I call home. The bill before us today directly addresses that risk. For the first time, we should be able to say to FIFA, UEFA, the IOC, and many others, come here and the framework is already in place. We are ready. But my lords, in Brent, we've always been clear-eyed about this. We value the treasure that Wembley represents, and precisely because we value it, we recognise the responsibilities that come with it. A bill that protects the commercial interests of major events must also speak to the communities that host them. And I'm glad that provisions today help us create the foundations of exactly that. As a council, we understood that from early on, Wembley's importance demanded not just celebration, but active stewardship. Brent developed deliberate, place-specific policy to manage the reality of hosting a global venue in the heart of a residential borough. And central to that was the establishment of an event day zone. The clean zone provisions in this bill echo that approach at a national level, and that is to be welcomed. This bill creates important new tools, but tools require people to wield them. And I agree with my noble friend Baroness Paul, the provisions on clean zones, on trading restrictions and ticketing enforcement, all these depend on local authorities having the capacity and the powers and the funding to act. The benefits of Wembley, though, are not only counted in pounds and jobs, they're counted in children lacing up boots on a Saturday morning because they watched something extraordinary the night before. And this is where the bill's importance extends beyond commerce, because it is events like these that protect the very events that inspire the next generation. Every major event at Wembley has a ripple effect through grassroots football and sport in our borough. Participation surges, girls' teams form, schools request coaches. The fundamental aim of Wembley's regeneration during my tenure as regeneration lead, and which continues today, is to deliver jobs, housing and community schemes, making Wembley a fantastic place to live, work for all its residents and visitors. That vision not only works if the stadium and community generally face each other, if outreach is real, if local young people see themselves in the sport that surrounds them, and if the high street on event days is a place of opportunity rather than disorder. In Brent, we worked hard to make that case. The increased trade on local high streets on event days, when managed well, is meaningful for small business. My lords, in July 2022, 87,000 people packed into Wembley to watch England's Lionesses beat Germany in the Women's Euros finals. That noise that night could, I'm reliably informed, be heard in Harrow, possibly Milton Keynes, and maybe even coming from our own household. That moment did not just win a trophy, it transformed a sport, and the momentum continues to build in participation, in attendance, in aspiration. Young girls who'd never been offered a football now play in organised leagues across Brent and beyond. The Women's Euro 2022 final at Wembley was by design an accessible event. According to UEFA's official ticketing announcement, maximum face value for a final ticket was £50, with over 500,000 tickets across the tournament priced at £25 or less, and a family of 4 were able to attend as little as £30. This was a deliberate, principled decision to make the Lionesses' greatest moment reachable for ordinary families. The UK has an extraordinary offer to make the world of sport: world-class venues, passionate fans, unmatched heritage, and community like the one I represented that have demonstrated for over a century what it means to host events of global significance with pride and professionalism. This bill gives us a legal framework to match that offer. Wembley is many things. It is a global icon, it is a community asset, it is on certain Saturdays an extremely good reason to avoid the North Circular. But above all, across 100 years in its original form and its current one, it is proof of what major sporting events can do for a place, economically, socially, culturally, and in shaping aspirations. This bill creates a framework that Wembley and every future host community deserves. It will ensure that events of that magnitude keep coming to the UK. For when they do, they're protected and properly managed, that their benefits are truly shared. For those reasons, and with the experience of Wembley behind me, not only do I invite noble lords to come and visit Wembley, and not just during championships, because Wembley's regeneration is fantastic, I commend this bill to the House wholeheartedly.
My Lords, when it comes to being part of the wind-up on a bill like this, you're trying to look at some of the central themes, and the fact, I think it was with one, maybe two exceptions, people are in favour of this bill. Because anybody who did many of these bills, we've talked about the Olympics when they're, or the Commonwealth Games bills, there's a great deal of what happens there that has to be repeated, at least in principle, every time. And it may have been quite exciting to do it once, but that was probably enough for one lifetime. So we're going through it. So it is a good thing. It is such a good thing that most of us are looking at it and saying, why doesn't it apply to a wee bit more? Now, the government, the Baroness will probably undoubtedly be up for this challenge, but saying, why is this limitation? Is quite an important thing that has to happen today. Why are we doing it here? Why aren't we bringing cultural events? Why aren't any of the big regular events used? Transport is the one that really gets me. And I don't know, it's about the gritty fullness of the experience at Twickenham. If you've ever tried to get out on a late train out of London from there, I can tell you they need some planning on that place. I'll ignore the burger I was once foolish enough to try to eat on the way in. Now, my Lords, if we are going to look at this properly, we have to look at it in the round. And this bill is definitely one that's written for the current world of big international sporting events. They are funded by big sponsorship deals, and many of the provisions, we've got a little list in, it's, Clause 1, subsection 2, it runs down A, B, C, D, E. B, C, and D are all about the preservation of rights, sponsorship, what's going on. Now, these are the things when we did those bills for the Commonwealth Games and for the Olympics, where we got the absurdities. My noble friend, Lord Foster, did with his usual thing of picking out a particularly good one, a little absurdity about sausages being displayed in rings. You could have got quite creative with the odd pudding in there, black or red and things like that. You could have done quite a lot with that. But I remember when we did actually look at the Olympic bill, I think it was the Olympic kebab shop that was operating somewhere down at the East End that was objecting to being removed. I think it was servicing about the staff from 3 scrapyards that were about to get destroyed. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. But there were always these little things going on. And little local communities always feel hard done by. I would hope, at the very least, we can put in something into this bill that says you have a duty to explain how this happens whenever you get to the affected group, or put greater emphasis on that. Because it is an irritation, one that we can probably do without having again and again. And if a little bit of compensation is required for one of these big sponsorship deals, I can't see why not. So let's have a look at that. And the next thing that comes up, we're talking about championships here. Championships are different from games because your teams aren't all based in the same place. And your teams and your participating athletes for a games are going to be, by design, should be in one place, a village. We don't have anything about infrastructure planning on that scale here in this bill. And then half of the organisations, I say this with a degree of temerity because I realise the people who have experienced living in villages are in this chamber today. And I'm still breathing, so I can't have done too much wrong. But how do you put them together? And the thing is, in this country, we have an excellent experience of it. We have the magnificent planning process. I always feel that for the Olympic Games, which was something, I think, half the bid was about getting that structure in place and planning for what might happen and doing it really well, that raised the bar. I remember disability access was brilliant because I think it was mainly in the laws we did this. We sat down, we made sure everything was as good as it could be. Indeed, we had a minister saying, "I can do no more, I've given you everything you want." That was in the Moses room. I hope that we can actually look at what is required for that. And then we have the other example, which was probably Birmingham, stepping at the last minute, when they actually created a village out of student accommodation, which was refurbed for the day and then went back to being student accommodation. We've done it both ways. There's examples of Glasgow haven't been involved in that, but when you have a village and when you don't have a village, the cutting down in the number of events that goes on, or a ready-made village. For instance, Rugby Sevens isn't in the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow this time because you can't afford the teams. Fortunately, they've kept the one team of sport that really needs it as its big showcase, and that's netball. But I hope that we can actually have a look at putting in something to give you that infrastructure which actually can be part of legacy. We go through. I hope we look at it to make sure this really does work. Now, when it comes to the thorny side of things like ticketing and ticket touting, which we're having a great deal of fun with today. Indeed, we started out at oral questions today on the subject about the problems of America and its models for the current World Cup, which is relying on legal challenge from their own internal states over this. So I hope we don't get too enthusiastic about this model. I hope that FIFA actually does learn. I hope that we can make sure we have a process that means that people know what they're buying. Because remember, in the States, what have we got out of this? We've got empty hotels because people can't afford to get there. This means that some of the benefits, some of the economic benefits, aren't going to be available to those potentially. So I hope we have a good, long, hard look at this and make sure that we actually get something that means when people know they can buy it, they can spend, or they can spend on travel, on nights out, etc. And it's not some sort of hair shirt event. I went there, slept in the airport and got back. Because if we do that, one, you won't get as many people going. Two, the economic benefits to the community you're in are going to be far less. So let's make sure and have a look at this and look at it in the round. Also, my lords, one of the things that we learnt from London was the one thing we didn't do there was encourage more people to play sport. It was the big failure. It was the only real failure, but it was the one that we had. People will be inspired by watching you. No, people get used to watching very good sport on TV. You do that, you encourage people to play by creating events around it, getting people involved, especially young people, creating the habit of being involved in sport, particularly sport outside the educational establishment. That is the way to keep people involved. We have many times we've proven. I would hope that we can look at where we encourage that to happen. And we encourage it to happen through local organisations, to the local sports clubs, to the events that are taking place in, or people where they're watching it. It is something which goes with the education programme and going on here, but we look at it and we make sure we involve and encourage. You don't do it just by flicking on a TV screen. We've proven that. So, looking down at the other things I was going to have a look at, I think everything's been covered by everybody else. And there is always a tendency here, when you get down, you've got a little bit more time, you merely go through all the points that were made and praise everybody, but that's the minister's job and not mine. So, my lords, I will finish by saying this. There is a great deal of enthusiasm for the basic principle, but there are a couple of big questions that come here. And the minister has referred to the fact that we're going to do this is a start of a process, and other things are going to happen in culture. If we're not going to do it here, where are we going to do it? What is the framework for this? Indeed, let's be brave. Let's ask for a timescale that isn't soon or possibly in the near future. Because the questions that are coming down here about the cultural activity, what are we doing about domestic events? Are we going to learn from this? Are we going to take some of them on? Really need to happen. And also, my lords, will we get a better definition? I think the Noble Lord Mayor raised this, sorry. About this, about what is an international sporting event. Is it something we bid for? Because he did raise one thing that I'd actually overheard another one of his colleagues talking about in the House and said, I must raise that. Rugby League World Cup. It happens fairly frequently here, but surely that is something which is big enough and has enough nations getting involved to be involved in. If it's not, we need to know. Because if the benefit is very small and very, should we say, potentially never happening, because you can get outbid for anything you can bid for. We're in a strong position at the moment, somebody else might get better at it. But will it apply to everything we're doing here that has an international element in it if it's not going to be the regularly happening events? We need to know about these things. But the very few bills I have been involved in this House have had this degree of a wind behind them to actually achieve. We wish this well, we wish the aims well, but I hope the government will be flexible enough and confident enough to accept constructive criticism for what it is. We want this to work. Let's see if we can make it a little better and make it work just that little bit better as well.
As others have said, it's also a privilege for me to get up and speak after such an august gathering of former Olympians, sporting legends, relatives, flying fullers, and of course the pleasure to have Lord Folkes back and making his points in his indomitable style. It really is the Lords at its best, and while we talk about the Lords at the best, I have to add that we saw more sporting legends being created last night in the parliamentary tug of war, where two baronesses in the chamber today, Baroness Davis and Shah, were winners against the House of Commons MPs. So if ever there was a bid, and it's been much talk today about other sporting events should be included, I think we saw another one last night that should be included in this legislation. My Lords, as many have said, sport has been central to our national story. Football, rugby, cricket, tennis, golf, squash, darts, snooker, the list goes on. These were all invented in the UK. We built Wimbledon, Twickenham, Lords and Wembley, cathedrals of competition, places where human spirit is tested and celebrated in equal measure. From Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile on a track in Oxford to the golden summer of 2012, when London showed the world how to host the Games with grace and greatness, this nation has a sporting tradition that is the envy of the world. It is precisely because we cherish that tradition that we must get this legislation right, and it is in this spirit that the opposition will approach the bill. Like everyone else in the House and the Chamber today, we also support the purpose of this bill. We recognise that many of the provisions stem from requirements put in place by UEFA, FIFA, the IOC and other governing bodies. But while supporting the intention of the bill, the final destination, like others, like Lord Mann, like Lord Hayward, we do have concerns about the chosen route to get there. My Lords, the most fundamental concern is that this is a skeleton legislation, and I understand the intention behind having such a framework, but there are many questions that we don't know, as others have mentioned. The bill does not tell us which sporting events will be designated. We have broad criteria, but we don't have the full details. We know the government has at least 2 events in mind, the Euros in 28 and the bid to host the FIFA Women's World Cup in 2035. But we do not know which other events might be included in the future. As Lord Addington mentioned, the Men's Rugby League World Cup, and I would say as a rugby supporter as well, to Lord Foster and Howard, and of course Lord Addington, the Rugby League Cup World Cup has been hosted 7 times in the UK. The Rugby Union World Cup has been hosted quite a few times and will be in the future. That is a frequent, regularly occurring event, which definitionally would be ruled out by this. But I think we would all say these are major events that we want to be included in this, and we want the UK to be bidding for. Cricket World Cup's another example, even if it does expose us to being beaten by the Germans, as Lord Barber said. As Baroness Evans, Baroness Nye, Lord Wood, Lord Addington set out, there are also concerns about those sporting sectors and cultural events that will not be covered by the bill. Wimbledon, the Open, the British Grand Prix, to name just a few. Why does the government not believe that they should not receive the protections that we've seen from ambush marketing, for example? The bill states that the event must be of significant international interest and gives a few examples, but it does not set out clearly how these tests will be applied in practice. How large will an event have to be considered? How many spectators and visitors will be required? Or how will the government determine the scale and reputation of an event? These are all questions that need answering. Nor do we have an idea about the length of time the regulations could be applied for, and the scope and the size of possible event zones, or the exceptions to the advertising and trading offences. Much of these crucial details will be left entirely to ministers, despite the concerns set out by many on the impact to local traders, as mentioned by Lord Fuller and Lord Young, amongst others. A future Secretary of State could designate events that Parliament never contemplated when passing this legislation. We are writing a blank cheque and trusting future governments of whatever complexion to fill the amount responsibly. That may be an act of faith, but it's not an act of scrutiny. And as we all know, scrutiny is what we, the Lords, do best. The current approach is to pass bespoke legislation when needed, such as the London Olympic Games and Paralympics Act in 2006, UEFA European Championship in Scotland Act, the Birmingham Commonwealth Games. There are many benefits to this. It allows for greater specificity, legislation that mirrors the unique requirements of the event, and crucially means the Parliament can better scrutinise the government's intentions. There is risk that this vague framework will not be specific enough for individual events, meaning that additional provisions may very well or almost definitely be needed to be made for those future events. But as explained by Lord Mann, when this happens, what scrutiny will be in place in those? So we will be, when it comes to committee, we will be tabling amendments to probe and clarify the scope and the scale of those powers. For example, the UEFA European Championship Act 2020 contained a specific exemption from the ticketing tout offence for charitable auctions, recognising that legitimate charitable activity is categorically different from commercial touting for profit. Also, again, as Lord Fuller and Lord Wood set out, there are legitimate fan-to-fan ticket exchanges that should be considered and actually add to the access available for spectators to go and see the game. This bill contains no such provisions. Indeed, every exception is left to the Secretary of State to specify in regulations. That is an unsatisfactory arrangement. Parliament should not leave to regulations what it can and should write into the bill itself. We will be pressing for the possible exemptions, particularly a charitable exception, to be included on the face of the bill. But I was also taken very much by Baroness Davies' points about the importance of free-to-air TV coverage in these events as well. Also, my lords, there is a notable absence of any time limit on the duration of regulations implementing this framework. Once a designation is made and regulations are laid, ministers may keep them in place for as long as they see fit. This is novel. Section 16 of the Birmingham Commonwealth Games Act states that trading offences could only begin 21 days before the Games began and must end 5 days after the Games ended. The Euro 2020 Act stated the provisions could only be enforced from the 1st of June to the 12th of July. So we would suggest that the government considers a maximum time limit for the regulations to be effective to ensure that the restrictions put in place are not in place unnecessarily. Many lords have mentioned actually the richness of the event when you go and see it, about seeing a lot of the local traders. To Baroness Shah, I had, well, I say the privilege, but Chelsea lost, but I had the dubious privilege of going to the FA Cup final the other day and thoroughly enjoyed drowning my sorrows afterwards with my family in many of the fine establishments around the area. That added to the richness of the experience for me. So we need to think carefully about making sure that that richness can be included, or if it is ruled out, it's for the minimum amount of time really necessary to fit in with the requirements of the IOC and other bodies. My lords, we must also be cognizant of the impact of large sporting events on local communities. Of course they bring enormous benefits, but there are also costs. Competition organisers and local authorities should only be duty-bound to ensure full clean-up responsibilities are put in place when major sporting events are held. We will also explore that when it comes to committee. Also, we cannot consider legislation designed to attract and support major international sporting events without addressing the economic backdrop against which it arrives. As set out by Baroness Evans, the government asks us to believe that Britain remains an irresistible destination for the world's greatest sporting occasions, and so it should be. But the organisers of international events make choices, and they make them based on costs. High levels of taxation, Employment Rights Acts that has imposed new and significant burdens on employers, a national insurance increase that functions as a direct tax on jobs, and a substantial increase in the minimum wage are real costs that have to be borne by businesses, including the event companies, the hospitality sector, the security firms, and the thousands of workers in the supply chain that make a major sporting event function. Britain's attraction as a host depends not only on our sporting heritage and our infrastructure, but on the commercial viability of operating here. The government cannot simultaneously proclaim that this bill as a statement of ambition for British sport and pursue policies that make Britain a more expensive and more regulated place to do business. These two are in tension, and the ministers have to explain how they intend to resolve it. And finally, as many noble lords have mentioned, we must address the question of scrutiny. Regulations implementing this framework will use the affirmative procedure, but only for the first time. Any subsequent regulations amending or extending the regime will use the negative procedures. In other words, Parliament will scrutinise the framework once, and after that, ministers can modify it with no requirement for approval. Your lordships will know that this is a significantly weaker arrangement than was provided for the Olympic Games Act in 2006, which required the affirmative procedure for all such regulations. There's no principal reason why the standards should be lower for this bill than it was for that previous legislation. If regulations are significant enough to require parliamentary approval once, they remain significant enough to require it subsequently. My lords, this bill, at its heart, is about protecting fans, maintaining the integrity of access to the events, and giving our country the best chance of winning those rights to hold those competitions. On these aims, the opposition is united with the government. But good intentions do not excuse the need for proper scrutiny. We owe it to the fans in the stands, the charities seeking to raise funds, and the businesses that make these great occasions possible to get the details right. We will work constructively in committee to improve the bill. I look forward to the debates ahead.
I'm grateful to all noble lords for sharing such well-considered views. I agree with my noble friend Lord Wood of Anfield that it's an honour to speak in a debate with so many sporting stars, a point made by several others. Today's debate has shown the knowledge and passion in your Lordship's House for hosting major sporting events in the UK and recognising the many benefits they bring. not least including my noble friend Baroness Shah, who spoke passionately about Wembley and the benefits that brings to Brent and the surrounding area. These can be transformative, as my noble friend Lord Barker, sorry, I can't even read my own writing. Barber, yes, thank you. I was like, no, that doesn't read like that. Huge apologies. Of Chittlehampton said, albeit unlike him, I wasn't alive to see England in the World Cup in 1966. And I think Noble Lord Hayward mentioned he was there as well. As the Noble Lord Rogan said, sport can and does bridge divides. And as my noble friend Baroness Paula Shepherd-Bush said, it is a small but mighty bill which will establish a framework that enables certain sporting events, and I'll come on to a bit more definition about that in due course, to benefit from the enhanced commercial protections needed to preserve the integrity of events and, importantly, offset costs to taxpayers. As the noble Lord Addington says, having a framework is a good thing. We've also, as noble lords will be aware, taken a UK-wide approach, working closely with the devolved government. I'll respond to as many of the questions and points raised as I can, and where I can't, I'll write to noble lords and place a copy in the library. I'm also very happy to meet noble lords with an interest in the bill. Today's debate has been far wider than the scope of the bill. I wanted to recap the scope in order of the bill, and to remind noble lords that in the context of this bill, an event must meet each of the three conditions set out on the face of the bill. This legislation is designed to enhance our ability to attract those one-off bid for sporting events which move from host to host, such as the Euros, Olympics and Paralympic Games, and I'm sure to the delight of my noble friend Baroness Nye, I think there were other golf fans as well, the Ryder Cup. The noble Lady Baroness Gray-Thompson also asked about the impact the bill could have on events such as the Tour de France, which cross borders. The legislation has been specifically designed to enhance our ability to attract those one-off bids for those sporting events which move from host to host. This includes those which cross borders, as well as those where the event is held wholly or partly in the UK. Also in response to the noble lady Baroness Gray-Thompson, without wanting to preempt the outcome of the initial assessment being carried out by UK Sport, which is at an early stage of consideration, in response to the noble lady's question about what is meant by the North, I wanted to reassure the noble lady and this House that UK Sport is engaging across the north of England in particular. A number of UK's competitor nations, such as Australia, New Zealand and France, have comparable legislation, and I hope that gives some reassurance to noble lords who doubt the value of a framework such as this, and have seen considerable success in securing hosting rights recently. For example, France has secured and hosted the Men's Rugby World Cup in 2023 and the Olympics in 2024. In defence of the framework approach, which I think Lord Fuller questioned, but was also questioned to some extent by the noble Lord Markham, we're clear that this is the right approach. We think it's a forward-looking framework designed to attract the best sporting events for years to come. We don't know in advance the relevant event-specific details, such as dates and places, and what exceptions might be proportionate for that event. And so these event-specific operational details will be set out in the regulations and provisions to the events. Our guiding principle has always been to fix as much policy detail on the face of the bill as possible, and to limit secondary legislation to adding event-specific details. In relation to the definition of major and mega events and bid transparency, which was raised particularly by the noble Lady Baroness Gray-Thompson and the noble Lady Baroness Bonham-Carter, in relation to the question of what is a major or mega sporting event, the Gold Framework, which is a joint DCMS and UK sport document, already sets out how we work jointly to support the feasibility assessment process for the bidding for and staging of major and mega sporting events at a UK level, and provides definitions of mega and major events. And I can make sure a link to that document is sent through to the relevant noble lords. In relation to delegated powers and how they're going to be applied, or whether they're justified and proportionate, raised among others by my noble friend Baroness Paul, my noble friend Baroness Dacres, and my noble friend Lord Wood of Anfield, and concerns raised about this as well by the noble Lord Markham. The delegated powers in the bill are tightly drafted. We fixed as much policy, as I said, possible on the face of the bill. Secondary legislation will be limited to applying the provisions to events and overlaying the event-specific operational details required. The affirmative procedure will apply to the first use of the powers by each government in relation to an event, providing appropriate opportunity for scrutiny, particularly over the types of event to which the provisions are being applied. And I have no doubt we will come back to that in committee. The noble lady Baroness Bonham Carter made a clear point about the role of culture alongside major sporting events and the role of cultural events. And if I use the example of London 2012, it clearly showed the UK at its best, both in terms of sporting events, but also in terms of the wider cultural offer. And I think the noble Lady Baroness Bennet of Manor Castle also highlighted that. I won't go through the details of my glowing comments around the events, because I think those were covered. In relation to the noble Lady Baroness Bonham Carter's question about whether cultural events which are part of a major sporting event, such as the 2012 Cultural Olympiad, will be within the scope of the bill doesn't define a sporting event, but does make it clear that this includes any opening or closing ceremony. Regulations applying the bill's provision to a sporting event can specify events which should be treated as forming part of the event where they are held in connection with the event. So that would bring in scope cultural events officially connected to a sporting event, such as the 2012 Cultural Olympiad. I'd like to thank a number of noble lords from across your lordship's house, not least the noble Lady Baroness Grey Thompson and the noble Lord Holmes of Richmond, for their track record of working over many years to support the UK's efforts to win bids. The noble lady raised the important point of legacy programmes. We work closely with our partners to maximise the potential of these sporting events, leaving behind positive legacies, inspiring the next generation of talent while promoting exercise and healthy living. I hadn't noticed the acronym that was drawn to our attention by the noble Lord Holmes, but I agree with him, it's probably appropriate. So many lords mentioned secondary ticketing that I am not going to list all noble lords concerned, but it is clear that this is understandably of great interest to your lordship's house. I wanted to reassure noble lords that this government is fully committed to addressing ticket touting and issues with secondary ticketing the market, which prevents so many people attending events. As my noble friend Baroness Gill said, and I agree with her that predatory is an appropriate term, and as my noble friend Lord Mann and my noble friend Baroness Taylor said, this is often involving organised crime. However, this is not the right legislative vehicle for all wider secondary ticketing reforms. The time-limited ticketing measures will ensure that tickets can only be resold with authorisation from the event owner or organiser satisfying the requirements of event owners. In response to the point raised by the noble Lord Young of Acton, we do not intend for the offences in this bill to be offences for which football banning orders can be imposed. Our wider plans will preserve a robust ticket resale market by directly targeting the operating model of ticket touts. They will ensure genuine fans can resell their tickets safely and securely and recoup their costs when they can no longer attend a live event. This government is committed to ensuring the UK is an excellent host and partner. I don't recognise the negative portrayal made by the noble Lord Markham of how he portrayed quite an unattractive picture of the UK as a destination for sporting events, and I don't recognise that. We will meet our commitments while protecting the interests of fans. We are a country that is open to for business and open for sporting events. Going back to the point about transfer of tickets to friends and families, I want to reassure Noble Lords that we're not criminalising the private transfer of tickets between friends, family and associates at face value. I'll now move to the topic of recurring sport.
Well, the bill as worded does do that, because it requires the permission of the initial seller to do so. And if the initial seller refuses to allow that to happen and requires the tickets to be returned to them, which is an increasing trend, as the bill's currently worded, it does do that, and that perhaps should be looked at.
I think maybe we can come back to that at committee. We don't think it does. I think it's more like the normal practice of people reselling them through, which I've done with, I won't mention the brand of theatre, but I regularly sort of end up not being able to attend theatres. I don't know whether the Chief Whip's got anything to do with that, but it is possible to resell tickets through a variety of means without sort of being prohibited by that, but we'll come back to that. In terms of the topic of recurrent sporting events, I think this is also something we're going to need to come back to, and I'm happy to talk to people about it individually. The Noble Lady Baroness Evans of Bose Parks and my noble friend Lord Fowkes, who I'm delighted, like obviously back in his place, raised this, as did my noble friend Lord Bassam and the noble Lord Markham. The time-limited provisions in this bill are designed to attract specific one-off events which require the government to make commitments to event owners during the bidding process. We don't think that regular events have the same requirements as events which hold competitive international bid processes. Just to reassure Noble Lords, as the bill was developed, we worked with some of the biggest recurrent sporting events to understand whether there was a demand for such provisions, and this did include the London Marathon. There was some interest, understandably, in the advertising and trading provisions, and I'd agree with the Noble Lady Baroness Evans about some of the issues faced by people about ambush marketing. But what we didn't find was that there was clear or consistent evidence base for their inclusion and insufficient appetite from the sector to fund the enforcement action required of local authorities. We're clear that if we're establishing criminal offences, enforcement by any organisation other than a public body wouldn't be appropriate or proportionate. But I'm very happy to meet the Noble Lady to discuss that further. So I'll ask my office to sort that out. We'll continue to support our domestic sports sector and the UK sporting calendar building on pre-existing relationships and frameworks. The Noble Lady Baroness Bunham Carter asked around, and I think a couple of other people also, apologies, a couple of other Noble Lords, also noted the work being done on a UK-wide major event strategy, which my department intends to publish within the next 12 months, and apologies, I'm not able to give a more precise timeline on that. This will set out our priorities for major events taking place across the UK, covering major events in all sectors, cultural, sporting and business. Like others, I'm delighted that my noble friend Lord McConnell will be working with DCMS on this area. The noble Lord Holmes raised a really helpful point on inclusivity, and it's absolutely right about the need to make sure that our major events remain inclusive. We intend for the major event strategy to support this work, but again, I'm very happy to talk to the Noble Lord in more detail about that. I think the Noble Lord Hayward, in his contribution, in the Noble Lord's contribution, talked around the... I find it really sad that gay male footballers don't feel able to be honest and open about that. So I'd also like to welcome the Noble Lord's observation about whether young gay men would feel able to play professional football. We welcome the great strides in the environment and inclusiveness at football matches over many years, but acknowledge that we can't be complacent in ensuring that our national game is for everyone. The Noble Lady Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle made a point around the Soft Power Council. It has met multiple times, and its working groups have actively contributed to activity across a range of areas, and we look forward to this continuing over the years and months to come. In terms of the points, I think alluding to some of the points made by the Noble Lord Markham, we recognise that the financial landscape for delivering major events across the country can be challenging, and we're committed to working with stakeholders from every sector to ensure events are safe, secure and sustainable and attractive. The Noble Lord Holmes is right about our need to ensure our major events are inclusive and affordable, so I've already made that point. The affordability point I don't think we've covered. A point also made by the Noble Lady Baroness Davis and my noble friend Baroness Dacres. We do anticipate that this will be included as well in the major events strategy. We aren't clear though that we need to legislate in this bill on that point, but I do look forward to further discussion on this as the bill progresses. There's clearly a range of views across your Lordship's House on gambling as it relates to sport. In response to the Noble Lord Fuller, we don't think this will prevent customers from placing and crashing out on bets on gambling mobile apps while they are in restricted trading zones. Appreciating that my noble friend Baroness Taylor of Bolton and the Noble Lord Foster of Bath raised concerns more widely about gambling with a less permissive tone. Outside of this bill, there are existing measures to limit gambling advertising at sporting venues. We've also announced our intention to consult this year on the banning of sports sponsorship by unlicensed gambling operators. I don't share the Noble Lady Baroness Bennett's scepticism of the front of shirt ban. I think it's significant, although in response to my noble friend Baroness Taylor's point, I don't think it's a panacea. However, as the Noble Lord Foster of Bath is already aware, the government doesn't have an intention of banning gambling advertising at this time. As ever, I'd be very happy to discuss this topic further with the Noble Lord and any other interested Noble Lords from across the House. Noble Lords, including the Noble Lord Fuller and the Noble Lord Hayward, have raised how these provisions will affect small businesses and street traders. The government will always look to ensure that the bill's provisions are implemented proportionately with a view to minimising disruption on existing businesses, in particular street traders. My Lords, we also fully recognise that people will need support in understanding whether they're impacted by the advertising trading provisions, and if that is the case, what options are available to them. In response to the Noble Lord Addington's point on making sure that people understand the measures, regulations under the bill must ensure that guidance is made available on the application of the advertising and trading provisions, and we will be able to require this as shared with this is shared with those most likely to be affected, such as street traders. On unauthorised associations, these aren't intended to crack down on local businesses showing their support for major events, or the example was given of a B&B. The prohibition only applies to activity that's likely to suggest to the public that there is an official association with an event. By this we mean that there's a realistic chance that everyday members of the public will consider that such an association exists. I am coming to the end, and I do want to talk about proportionate enforcement because I think Noble Lords were concerned about it. The focus of the bill is activity that undermines the integrity of a sporting event and the interests of its commercial partners, or that could disrupt the safe movement of spectators. So, as with the Birmingham Commonwealth Games, we will work with event organisers and local authorities to ensure enforcement action is proportionate. We think that the enforcement powers in the bill will provide a sufficient deterrent while ensuring effective action can be taken when needed. I'm going to write to my noble friend Baroness Nyes and other on the way in which we could increase the fine, and I'm going to also write to my noble friend Baroness Taylor, Noble Lord Addington on the transport plan, Noble Lady Baroness Evans. I'm definitely going to write to you on the Finance Act because I do not have that detail to hand. And I will need to write to Baroness Bennett on her point around sponsorship and fossil fuels. My Lords, the provisions in this bill will further reinforce our world-leading reputation for hosting major sporting events. And with it, we think we're sending a clear message that the UK is not just a home for sport, but a prepared, professional and fan-focused host, ready to both host and take on the world. In response to Noble Lord Wood's point on timings for the committee stage, I have to say that such matters are dealt with through the usual channels, but you can always talk to the Chief Whip. I'm grateful to all Noble Lords for a varied and interesting debate. I urge all Noble Lords to support this bill, and I beg to move.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. As many of that opinion will say content. The contrary not content. The contents have it.
I beg to move the commitment motion standing in my name on the order paper.
The question is that this motion be agreed to. As many of that opinion will say content. The contrary not content. The contents have it.
My Lords, I beg to move that the House to now adjourn.
That the House to now adjourn.